Well, good morning. I'm used to a good morning, Mrs. Burns back here. You don't have to. That's what I'm used to doing on a Monday morning. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I absolutely adore being part of this panel. I have had the privilege of reading every single thesis paper that has been produced by our students, and it is an honor actually to be able to do that and then watch you present. This is a fun day. This is a day where, as CJ said, you get a captive audience that has to listen to you talk about something that you've studied and care about and can speak winsomely and well about. And so that's lovely. So I'm so happy to be part of that captive audience. This is a culmination of years of work and what probably seems like maybe years and sometimes minutes when you're running up to a deadline of work. But I'm so proud of you all for working not only for these past few months on the very challenging project of a thesis, but all of the years that have led up to this. So I hope that you have a great sense of peace and calm right now, because this is the fun part. We are here to cheer you on and to ask you more about the thing that you've been studying. And so I just want to encourage you all today. Let us know that we are already so very proud of all that you've accomplished and cannot wait to have a discussion with you about what it is you've learned. Parents, grandparents, friends, thanks so much for being here. We so appreciate your support of the students, and I know you'll enjoy today as well. And I want to give a special thank you to those who have mentored our students through the process. So Dr. Bill Marsh and Mrs. Bukataru. Am I missing? Is there anyone else who's done independent study? And then Mr. Stanzik, of course, has walked through not only Heartland, so right? Did you do Heartland for an independent study, as well as all of our 3 students who are presenting on religions. Thank you so much for doing that. It is a heavy lift, but it is. I could not imagine someone better to mentor them through that process. So thank you so much for that. And with that, I'm going to hand over the mic to Mr. Stanzik.
I just want to echo so much of what Mrs. Burns just said. Very proud of all of you guys. This is a huge lift. This whole year, this day has been ahead of you, and now you're about to enter into that part of your life in which you have completed the thesis. It's not ahead of you any longer. So thank you for all your work. Thank you for your thoughtfulness, and I'm proud of each of you. And I also want to thank parents and grandparents for any ways in which you've been pouring into these theses. We realize this isn't just a lift for the student. This is a lift in many ways for the whole family as they're delving into the details of their subject. And so well done to you too. You're here as well. Today is, if you're into this sort of thing, today is not only May 14th, it's a day of the church calendar, Ascension Thursday. So on this day, it's remembered across the West that our Lord ascended into heaven, which is a comfort in 2 ways, which is that, Christ is in control. So that's a comfort to you guys as you go off and do something that can cause a lot of nerves. Christ is on his throne. And, like it would have to be, no matter how rough it gets up there, Christ is still in control. So that's a comfort to all of you, right? But also, more seriously, it's a reminder to us about what the real goal of all this is. We desire that that the preparation involved in piecing together a thesis is developing more than just the skills of research and the skills of rhetoric, that it's ultimately rolling up to the glory of Christ and preparing the kind of character that rolls up to the glory of Christ and can take part in the demonstration of his kingdom on earth. And so that's our ultimate prayer for each of you guys and for all of us. Let me pray briefly, and then we'll begin with Miss Smythe. Father, we thank you that you have placed your chosen king on the throne. We thank you that you made yourself known to us in your Son, and that he is reigning even now and bringing human history to the conclusion that you have foreordained. We thank you, Lord, for each of these students and for all the preparation and the thought that they've put into their theses. Undoubtedly, they've had to untangle difficult puzzles and thought through carefully how to word this or that idea. Thank you, Lord, for all their work. And we trust, Lord, that it will be ultimately to your glory. We pray that you would be calming nerves. We pray that you would be guiding their thoughts and guiding them as they go through the oral defense. Be with each of us as panelists, that we would be wise and that we would be attentive. Give us all energy today, Lord, and we pray all this through Christ our Lord. Amen. So first, CJ Smythe.
For the past 5 years, I have been on a personal quest to better understand health, specifically how to avoid toxins and chemicals in food. Recently, because of health complications in my family, I've realized the dangerous impact of the chemicals in our environment. Therefore, when presented with the opportunity to create a thesis on any topic of my choosing, I knew I wanted to investigate an avenue of human health and modern chemical policy, and the wide-ranging effects of synthetic fragrances captivated me. Fragrance is found in everything, from luxury brands to household products, from Dior to Dove. Yet, it is presented to consumers as a single, simple label: fragrance or parfum. It is the lavender that makes my shampoo soothing, or the pomegranate masking the smell of alcohol in my hand sanitizer. Far from sounding disquieting, fragrance appears natural, inviting, and even therapeutic. However, what I did not realize is that when you see this term on an ingredient label, fragrance doesn't just refer to a pleasant scent. It's a catch-all term for a complex mixture of chemicals, many of which have nothing at all to do with the smell, such as solvents that help ingredients blend together, or stabilizers that keep a product from spoiling. Initially, I doubted that synthetic fragrance could be harmful, especially because it's common even in clean or organic cosmetics. But as I researched, I was shocked to learn that this catch-all category could legally conceal so many potentially harmful components. I realized that a lack of legislation does not mean safety. In fact, it places unsuspecting consumers at even greater risk. Today, fragrance is no longer synonymous with perfume, though its roots do lie in perfumery traditions that have spanned millennia. Perfume changed dramatically with the Industrial Revolution and the rise of adaptable synthetic compounds. As technologies advanced, fragrance emerged as a broad ingredient category, encompassing not only scent, but also complex mixtures that perform multiple functions within a product. Since then, the industry has expanded rapidly, and now consumers encounter 20 to 30 fragrances each day like the ones before you today. Fragrances are intricate chemical solutions composed of numerous compounds. Many of these synthesized chemicals are added as scents, while others serve non-aromatic purposes, including extending longevity and improving performance. Chemical solvents are created to create an even distribution of aromatic compounds, and these often constitute 50 to 90% of a fragrance formula. In addition, masking agents neutralize underlying chemical odors, so much so that even unscented products frequently contain fragrance. Chemists draw from more than 6,000 organic chemicals in personal and household products, with roughly 2,000 actively being used in fragrance formulations. And while the body can eliminate many toxins, fragrance molecules can bypass initial barriers, circulate widely, and cause both short-term symptoms and long-term effects in sensitive individuals. These chemicals enter through inhalation, dermal absorption, and incidental indigestion. Volatile odorants dissolve in the nasal mucus and travel through the respiratory tract. When small enough, they then can pass through the airway walls and into the bloodstream. Likewise, non-volatile liquids drive a dermal uptake, potentially irritating the skin and causing systemic circulation. The body employs several defense mechanisms. Barriers such as the blood gas, gut immune, and blood-brain barriers, along with detoxification by the liver and kidneys. Yet, chemicals circulate before detoxification occurs, allowing potential health effects. Fragrance molecules can trigger asthma attacks, migraines, and allergic contact dermatitis. In fact, fragrance allergies are the second most common contact allergy, affecting 3.5% of adults. And over 75% of individuals with asthma or COPD report fragrance-related breathing difficulties. The EPA regulates human health and environmental safety in the US, approving chemicals, including fragrance ingredients, for commercial use. In response to concern about chemical exposure, Congress passed the Toxic Substance Control Act in 1976, which gives the EPA the authority to regulate and evaluate chemicals. Today, this act, the TSCA, has an inventory listing over 86,000 chemicals, with over 42,000 actively used. Fragrances in cosmetics are now also regulated by the 2022 Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act, or MOCRA, which gives the FDA federal greater authority to regulate cosmetic safety, manufacturing, labeling, and reporting of adverse health effects. As awareness of fragrance-related risks grows, consumers increasingly demand transparency, and the public continues to push for clearer disclosure, stronger testing, and greater accountability. Synthetic fragrances in cosmetics pose significant risk to consumers due to harmful chemicals in their formulations, inadequate legislation, and legal barriers that prevent informed decision-making. Third-party testing consistently reveals alarming health effects linked to fragrance compounds, each of which may contain dozens to hundreds of known or suspected toxins. Despite this, fragrance houses deliberately use these chemicals as solvents, fixatives, emulsifiers, and scent agents. The International Fragrance Association, or IFRA, maintains a list naming more than 3,000 chemicals used in fragrances, many associated with documented or suspected health effects. These include methyleugenol, a clove-like scent that is restricted in the EU and classified as an animal carcinogen; lilial, a floral aldehyde banned in the EU as a reproductive toxin; and styrene, a solvent with respiratory and neurological effects and a suspected human carcinogen. Concerns about these compounds are long-standing. In 1991, the EPA found over 150 volatile organic compounds in 31 fragrance products, including toluene, a toxin linked to fatigue, dizziness, cognitive impairment, and liver damage, in every product. Repeated exposure or indoor inhalation can overwhelm the kidney and the liver, creating a cumulative chemical burden. Nanoparticles can bypass the blood-brain barrier and travel directly into the brain. Products marketed as safe may contain hazards capable of causing long-term damage, including endocrine disruption, PCOS, liver toxicity, Alzheimer's disease, and even cancer. Unborn children are especially vulnerable to toxins that enter the fetal bloodstream. These toxins can cause structural birth defects, growth problems, functional impairments, and even fetal death. A 2022 review by the researchers at the Iran University of Medical Sciences concluded that, quote, most perfumes, even in small amounts, can cause neurological disorders in the fetus of pregnant mothers. Two particularly dangerous chemicals are synthetic musks and phthalates. Musks, widely used as a fixative or clean scent, are linked to gynecological abnormalities, ovarian failure, sperm damage, and infertility. Researchers suggest that they may induce brain cell degeneration, potentially contributing to Parkinson's disease. And nitromusks, the most hazardous of these, are also flagged as potentially carcinogenic. Phthalates are a well-recognized endocrine disruptor that compromises ovarian function, affects spermatogenesis, accelerates puberty, and increases the risk of breast and ovarian cancer. They are also associated with obesity, diabetes, PCOS, and infertility. They can cross the placental barrier, causing developmental effects and gene expression changes in unborn children. Current U.S. chemical law creates a regulatory vacuum, allowing these hazardous substances to enter cosmetics because federal testing and oversight are insufficient. To produce new cosmetics, manufacturers compile a safety substantiation profile for multiple regulatory bodies. Under MOCRA, companies are supposed to first compile and submit ingredient lists for toxicological review. They then combine ingredients into a final formula, conduct toxicology risk and safety assessments, register their facility, and submit their product listings to the FDA portals. After market entry, companies maintain records for potential FDA post-market reviews. Although this pathway appears rigorous, its practical execution overlooks hazardous chemicals. The U.S. cosmetic brands may use any unrestricted chemical in the TSCA inventory, including many linked to severe health effects. When the TSCA was passed, all 60,000 chemicals that were then being used in the industry were automatically grandfathered in without testing, and the EPA still lacks an effective mechanism to retroactively evaluate them. As a result, less than 2% of the 86,000 plus chemicals in the TSCA inventory have undergone extensive testing. The EPA is also known for its limited enforcement. By 2006, it had only partially banned 5 chemicals, despite adding more than 23,000 to the inventory. With limited safety data, the EPA often relies solely on computer models to assess carcinogenicity, toxicity, and endocrine disruption. Consequently, roughly 75% of TSCA-listed chemicals have no safety screening, while the remaining 25% are deemed safe largely through industry-supplied data and predictive modeling. Under MOCRA, companies are supposed to compile documented safety substantiation, but this is essentially done on an honor system. New products do not need FDA approval before market entry, and these safety files are rarely examined, either while the product is being produced or after it is placed on the market. Although the FDA can issue recalls or require reformulations, such actions are infrequent. In reality, more than 95% of products will never undergo FDA screening. As a result, cosmetics containing hazardous chemicals can be legally sold and marketed as safe, despite known risks. Because toxins are included in commercial fragrances and regulatory oversight fails to ensure proper governmental screening, customers must navigate these ingredient lists to protect themselves from potential hazards. However, manufacturers have the legal right to list entire chemical mixtures under a single fragrance ingredient by claiming the need to protect trade secrets, preventing consumers from making informed choices. Fragrance manufacturers use trade secrets to conceal the ingredients in a synthetic fragrance. For instance, a product labeled phthalate-free may still contain phthalate within the fragrance. Although some companies now disclose their fragrance ingredients, most companies still withhold certain chemicals. The L'Oreal Group, for example, announced in 2021 that its transparency policy reveals, quote, at least 95% by weight of the ingredients present in pure fragrance, end quote. But the remaining 5% are trade secrets and are thus undisclosed. Yet in most fragrance formulas, solvents make up 70 to 90% of a formula, and hazardous chemicals like phthalates or nitromusks account for only 1 to 5%. Thus, even small, undisclosed fractions can still contain harmful substances. Without full ingredient disclosure, consumers cannot make risk-informed decisions. Healthcare providers cannot offer appropriate care. Researchers cannot study potential health effects, and regulatory bodies cannot set adequate safety standards. In defense of the industry, fragrance houses and cosmetic manufacturers may acknowledge the presence of hazardous chemicals in fragrances, but insist that they are careful to abide by government safety limits. Conscientious manufacturers follow industry-approved safety measures and dosages. However, operating within the safety limit does not negate the evidence of dangers. Hazardous chemicals in synthetic fragrances bioaccumulate in the body, causing long-term impact from consistent, safe dosages, not single large dosages. As researcher Dr. Shafira Abloushi of the Zayed University in Dubai published in her recent narrative review of perfumes and cosmetics, notably, even low-dose, chronic exposure to these chemicals has been associated with biological effects due to their capacity for bioaccumulation, end quote. Consumers are routinely exposed to multiple synthetic fragrances, exceeding single-dose maximum dosage guidelines. Current safety standards don't adequately account for multiple points of exposure. When consumers inhale fragrance compounds in cosmetics, these compounds circulate through the body before the kidney and livers filter the toxins. In that time, compounds can deposit in human fatty tissue and organs. Despite being added within safe amounts, these chemicals still present health hazards. Next, it was argued that current US chemical law creates a regulatory void, enabling companies to bring hazardous chemicals to market. The industry has responded by saying that they adhere to safety standards recommended by the IFRA. However, joining the IFRA is done on a voluntary basis, and the organization lacks the authority to enforce laws. It sets fragrance usage rules, but cannot investigate, fine, suspend, or penalize companies for non-compliance. In addition, the IFRA is inherently biased. As they acknowledge on their website, the organization is created by the fragrance industry for the fragrance industry. Moreover, the IFRA relies on industry-driven safety assessments from the Research Institute for Fragrance Materials, or the RIFM, which further undermines its effectiveness. The RIFM's expert panel for fragrance safety reviews only reviews industry-generated data, not independent information, and it has failed to restrict known carcinogens and hazards. As a voluntary organization, the IFRA cannot replace effective federal legislation. The IFRA is merely a patch, not a long-term fix. Furthermore, the argument that company trade secrets deny consumers necessary information to make informed purchases is countered by the industry's claims that trade secrets protect innovation and competitive markets. However, competitors can legally reverse engineer fragrance compounds, rendering this competitive edge non-existent. Thus, trade secrets only withhold information from the consumers, not the competitors. Large-scale fragrance corporations can use gas chromatography mass spectrometry, or GCMS, to break down compounds into their core chemical components, revealing around 90% of a formula, specifically synthetic ingredients. Therefore, trade secrets only act to withhold information from the consumers who lack the resources to perform GCMS. Under current market provisions, a conscious consumer has no means to verify a product claim, such as being phthalate-free. Due to trade secrets, a consumer who is aware of inherent dangers posed by chemicals such as phthalates may actively read cosmetic ingredient labels, yet still be exposed to these toxins. In conclusion, synthetic chemical compounds have transformed the fragrances into a multi-billion-dollar industry. Yet, as the industry has expanded, legislation and scientific understanding have struggled to keep pace. Third-party testing has repeatedly exposed hazardous chemicals in fragrances, but current laws still allow for products to enter the market with minimal screening and almost no retroactive oversight. Trade secret provisions enable manufacturers to hide ingredient lists, while existing exposure limits bioaccumulation in the chemicals in the body. The IFRA, a voluntary body with no enforcement power, offers industry-generated data to assess safety limits. Meanwhile, modern mass spectrometry technology has already eroded the very trade secrets the industry claims to protect. In pursuit of profit, safety has been sidelined. Manufacturers innovate rapidly, but policy and toxicology testing lag decades behind. The industry assures the public that the products are safe, labeling chemical bundles as fragrance, and consumers trust them. But although public awareness is rising, government action remains slow. Until people can clearly identify what is dangerous, their only reliable protection is to avoid fragrances altogether. The federal government must strengthen legislation, require chemical-specific toxicology testing, and raise safety substantiation standards. Compliance cannot remain voluntary. Today, cancer, neurological conditions, infertility, and organ failure are increasing across all ages. Synthetic fragrances are likely contributing, and these represent a dangerous, under-regulated threat to public health. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smythe. I must say I've always had an issue with the usefulness of the cosmetic industry. So this was like a good affirmation for my perspective. But also thanks for that. I'm wondering, you've touched on like a lot of political complexities without mentioning them directly, and clearly we have an issue with like industry convincing government that we won't really need safeguards when in fact, as you're suggesting, we do. Can you offer any way out of this impasse? Just in terms of reconciling aggressive industry lobbying with reduced funding for regulatory agencies. Mm-hmm. And do you see a way forward?
It's definitely a hard question. You look at this and you're like, what can we do? What can we change? And the people have this public outcry. We are saying, we want to know, what are we consuming? What are we putting on our bodies? What am I inhaling? And at the same time, the industry itself is upset with the US government. They're like, we want more freedom. Why do we have to switch what we use in Europe versus the US? Why can't we just have the same thing everywhere? We want to be able to go faster. Why is the EPA lagging behind? And there's these these pressures that are coming saying, hey, protect the people. Hey, the industry, we want to make more money. We want to produce more. And when it comes to reconciling things, it's mind grappling. It's like, well, what can we as people do? What can the government even do? In small ways, I think that what we can do is take some simple steps, some smaller things that may not be overhauling how the EPA tests chemicals yet, but giving people more awareness. In the EU, they use a program called REACH. And one of the largest parts of REACH is that chemicals, such as fragrances, are required to list some of these main allergens on the bottle. This is something that in the US is not currently required. Some products do. For example, the Method conditioner on the table, it does list known contain fragrance allergens, and it lists lilial and coumarin as 2 known allergens. That's not something that is required, so none of the other products list that. That's a step that would greatly help people who know that they have allergies or know that they react to some of these products without overhauling how we test things. Additionally, the EPA, when we are testing fragrances to put in products like a candle, in the TSCA inventory, each individual chemical has to be approved for that usage. So for a fragrance like these in a cosmetic, once it's in the TSCA inventory, the FDA says, great, you can use any one of these. For a product like a synthetic fragrance in a candle, it has to be individually approved to be used in a candle. That's not a step we've taken with cosmetics, but if that was a step the EPA could take, that would also heighten the amount of things. Like it would put, say there are things that are apparently being used in fragrances that are not being used in like a candle, but are being used in a shampoo without overhauling how we test, without straining our budget. Does that answer your question?
Well, I understand it's a very broad-ranging question, and there's really no easy solution here. Can you offer a biblical perspective on the use of perfume or not?
So in the use of perfume, it's looking at the question of, okay, is it a sin to wear perfume? Is it a sin to use a shampoo that has an added fragrance? It's also a really hard question. It's a thing where partially because it's a gas that's in the world, it's the air you breathe in, it's not something you control. It's not something that you can completely cut yourself away from, because every time you walk through a grocery store, if you walk down a cleaning aisle, if you walk down a cosmetic aisle, you're inhaling those scents. And those are entering into your body, the same as if you were wearing a perfume. But it's something that we have to look at. Okay, what are my personal convictions, and what does the Bible say? In the Bible, we are called to take care of ourselves. For example, 1 Corinthians 6:19-20 says that the body is a temple of the Holy Spirit, and this is how we are supposed to honor our bodies for the Lord. I wouldn't say that means, you cannot have any fragrances ever, because in this world, that's part of our society. That's nearly impossible. There are microplastics in the water that we drink. There's so much. It's hard to avoid altogether, but we can limit it. Partially that's for our own health. Partially that's to take care of our bodies and to be mindful of what am I putting into my body, the same as the food I eat. I know that I want to eat a balanced diet because that is taking care of my body. It's giving me the energy and sustaining me to carry out the Lord's work.
Very good presentation.
Thank you.
Until this morning, I had never really given much thought to. Okay, sorry. Until this morning, I never gave much thought to how much is involved in fragrance, in chemicals, and so on and so forth. Is it your understanding that fragrance basically has to do with smell? Is fragrance, is that a term that is used to generally, a common person would understand as fragrance means smell, what something smells like? Is that accurate?
Initially, that's how, at least in the industry,
Okay.
it started, was a fragrance was simply a scent. Like in ancient temples, they would ground up rose petals and put those into the plaster of walls to give it a rose smell when you walked into these ancient Greek temples. Especially with the Industrial Revolution, that shifted. So fragrance seems like it means, oh, this is just the scent. You know, it's just the lavender in my shampoo. But now it is this whole class of chemicals. It's really a concoction in and of itself. And the concerning part is less so these scents themselves, but all the things that are being added to make it linger, to make it last longer on the shelf.
Okay.
So for example, phthalates aren't ever added to a fragrance as a scent, but they are added to make it shelf stable. They're added to make it stick to your skin. Like if you have a lotion, they're gonna make that scent linger instead of just evaporating right away. And that's a little scary because you're like, oh, this isn't the scent that I'm buying. It's all these other products and all these other chemicals you didn't even know you were ingesting because they're not listed in listings. It just says fragrance, but it means hundreds of others.
Okay, so is it your contention, I like how you circled the word fragrance on these particular products. Is it your contention that the manufacturers should have an additional paragraph describing what the fragrance includes?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
I mean, me as a nerd, I would love that. I would sit there and read it. I can't ask all companies to do that. Their label would like go around the product. You'd have to peel it off like you do in Tylenol. But many companies, for example, Procter & Gamble is a company that years ago, they took the initiative to publish their entire list, every single product that they put in a fragrance, and that's on their website. So a conscientious consumer can Google it and look it up and say, okay, what is in a Procter & Gamble fragrance? And online, they have a whole list, and it's like, these are all of the different chemicals that we are using in our facilities. And you can say, okay, these are all the chemicals that they're using, and then look up which of these are concerning, because there are lists that will rank. These are the known dangers in certain chemicals. And we can see, oh, this one's potentially carcinogenic. This one killed rats. And kind of cross-reference it in that sense, but it is that extra added step beyond just looking at it on a shelf.
So one last question. The product itself also has a warning or a caution, and it says, if irritation occurs, discontinue use. So my question is that sufficient to protect the consumer from, if they are allergic to a particular chemical that's in the fragrance, the burden is on them, on the consumer, to simply stop using the product. Is that sufficient, or should the burden be on the manufacturer to make the product less toxic or less carcinogenic?
Yeah, I believe at the moment the industry has placed the burden on the consumer. It's up to the consumer to figure out, is this causing an allergy? Is this something that is causing an immediate effect in my body? But I think that needs to shift. Many of the studies that we're now seeing coming out are hinting at long-term effects from fragrance usage that you wouldn't be able to know from applying a product if it is causing liver toxicity. And so someone will unknowingly continue to use that product because they're being told by the industry it's safe unless you have adverse reactions in case stop, but that's only signaling at an immediate reaction like contact dermatitis, not these long-term concerns. So I think that the industry needs to revamp their standards because they're telling us it's okay.
Thank you, CJ.
Excellent job. So I've got a question. I'm interested in the fragrance industry. Is there a group of kind of purists who are talking about not using synthetic fragrances at all and wanting to use more natural options? Or is that not even in the fragrance industry because the scents don't last and there's something they would imagine to be, I don't know, ineffective about natural scents?
It's a fantastic question. To be honest, in my research, I haven't come upon a part of the industry that is advocating for the use of natural scents. There are some companies that do use a natural fragrance. For example, Burt's Bees uses on their products, it says natural fragrance. That, I would say, is a step above synthetic fragrances, but it can still contain hazardous chemicals. They're not synthetically created. They are based in something that was at one point organic, but that can shift over a long period of time.
Okay.
In the industry itself, I would have to do more research to see, is there a party that is lobbying for this introduction, this change? Company by company, many companies do. Some companies will use essential oils in their products. Other companies will use natural fragrances. But that's more of a step that those individual companies are taking that kind of follows their personal brand beliefs. In the industry, I haven't seen
So
in
is
my
Burt's
research.
Bees part of that organization that is self-regulating?
To be honest, I'm not fully sure.
Okay.
In large part, any of these organizations can self-regulate. They can join the IFRA kind of as a compliance, almost like a club that's like, we have these standards that you should meet, but if you don't, we're not going to do anything about it. And it's a seal kind of like renown a little bit. So Burt's Bees may be part of that as well. But being part of the IFRA doesn't mean they're pushing a cleaner, a better product. In many ways, the IFRA itself is kind of just pushing fragrance. And it's up to the companies to decide, are we choosing specific products?
Yeah, and you opened up the discussion for Europe. Actually, they have higher standards than we do here
Yes.
about what is allowed in products, and so the companies who sell in both places actually have to go out of their way to put more toxic chemicals in the U.S. versions.
They do.
So can you talk to that? And I mean, why not have the U.S. follow the European standards? They've already set them, and these companies live by them.
I wish I could read the brains of these people and say, why are you doing this to us? Why are you poisoning us? In large part, I do believe that it's price. It's
Yes.
cheaper, it's faster to use these chemicals that we are making in mass supply rather than going and reformulating to do what they're doing in Europe over here, to pull the products and the chemicals that the European lists are using, and then to take the US lines and pull the dozens to hundreds of chemicals that they said, actually, that's flagged, it's really bad for you. In Europe, we're not going to allow that. That's a reformulation and a lot of cost. In the US, we even see this happening. California recently updated their lists, so many companies have to make an entirely different formulation for California and the other 49 states. Why they don't just make it for all of them, I don't know. But rather than reformulate to match California's standards, they're pushing back at California and saying, why are you doing this to us? You're hurting our industry. You're costing us money. We see the same thing in food. We see the same thing in so many industries where we're adding in synthetic ingredients, we're adding in extra things, and then the US is going with, well, what's cheapest, what's fastest, what can reach the most people.
I feel like I could talk to you about this for hours.
I love it.
I guess I'll ask this question, similar to Dr. Marsh, instead of thinking about the industry and what, as a Christian, what does the industry need to do? I guess I'd put it back on the individual. We have peanut-free zones where people who have no problem eating peanuts, we say no, we're going to not do that for the health and well-being of others. As Christians, do we have a responsibility for how we use these products, given that, as you said earlier, you can't be away from it, right? You walk in places and people have perfume on, or they're using scented soaps. do we have a responsibility as Christians, now that we know this information, to do anything with it?
It's a difficult question to look at and say, how do we grapple with this? To a degree, because we can't know, we can't control, and it's hard to say, okay, no more fragrances at all. So it is hard. It's something that, it's a gaseous chemical that it's going out into the air. It's not a contained thing. If someone, I believe, is coming up to you and saying, I know I get headaches from fragrances, you know, we're meeting for lunch, will you please not wear something like that? Then of course, you're meeting with them, you're saying, I don't want to be causing you harm. But if it's something like going into a grocery store where you don't know who around you could be affected by this, they may not know themselves that that's what's affecting them. It's hard to say, stop. It's something where we can mitigate. In fragrance is a large part. Many of the concerns are born of bioaccumulation and how much you're using. So it's looking at your products mindfully and saying, well, the lotion that I put on my hands every single day, maybe that's something where I should be really looking for a product that is fragrance-free because I'm applying this 10 times and safety limits are made for a single day application. But something where, like a hand sanitizer, maybe you're using it once a day, every once in a while, and it's quite hard to find a version that works as effectively without a fragrance. Maybe that is where you're compromising. I think it's being mindful of the people around you, but it's also not something that we can fully avoid and cut out. Many buildings have a fragrance-free section, and I believe that that's fantastic. And then other people should be mindful of, if you know you're wearing a lot of perfume, maybe don't sit right in front of the fragrance-free section. But we can't fully box it out. It's a gas that, it's in the air we breathe.
Really just one two-part question, which is just where do you see, on the one hand, the industry trending? Obviously, there's the European standards that are higher and better. Do you see the industry trending toward universalizing those standards, or is it trending somewhere else? And then the second part of the question is, where do you see kind of the consciousness of the general public trending on this subject?
So where is the industry headed? Unfortunately, I'd wish I could say I think that they are adopting European standards, but they're not. To a degree, we're doing quite the opposite. Recently, in November and December, there was a huge push, a huge campaign by Bath & Body Works to pump the New York subway with some of their signature Christmas scents to make the subway smell like Christmas and mask some of the natural subway scents. And yeah, even though there's a huge backlash from people, a lot of people were like, I haven't been able to go on the subway all month because I'm getting headaches as soon as I step in there. The industry was like, what a success. We're gonna keep doing this. And it's really trailblazing this whole field of ambient advertising, and even scratch and sniff billboards are now a thing. So you can smell and take it in and remember the product in a whole new way. And that to me feels like maybe we're not thinking of the person who could have an asthma attack from being in the subway, which they need to take to get to work. Maybe we're not thinking of the family walking down the street and the little children who now have to run past the billboard that is full of fragrances. Not that we're adopting, maybe this is something that's dangerous. On the flip side, I do think that consumer awareness is rising. People are starting to realize, wait, if there are tons of chemicals in my food, maybe there are chemicals in my cosmetics. They're saying, I'm getting a headache every time I'm near this scent. Maybe this is correlated. The industry is making it somewhat hard to learn about what this could be because of trade secrets. People cannot take the step to say, well, what is actually happening? What am I actually breathing? We're just told, oh, it could be fragrance, and then the industry is saying, but we test it, it's safe. And then companies like L'Oreal are saying, and this is what we're using, like, you know. And so it makes it hard. It makes it so a consumer who is saying, I see health concerns, or I'm confused, they can come to a point where they're like, well, I know that there's an issue, like I did in this thesis, but they cannot pinpoint this is the chemical that is scaring me. This is what needs to change. The industry as a whole, the way it's been set up, is structurally causing these issues, not the current way that we're living it out.
Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we will reconvene. And next up is Karis Coffeen.
Let me take you on a trip to the cinema. It is 1956, and we are perusing the newest movie posters. As fans of science fiction, we halt by one titled Forbidden Planet. The poster features a lumpish, comical-looking robot in a dramatic black and red wasteland, capturing a swooning, scantily clad blonde woman. Continuing down the line of posters, we encounter more of the same. Helpless women with perfect hair and makeup cowering in the arms of a macho love interest or being abducted by some villain. Now let us jump forward 67 years to 2023. This time at the cinema, we stop by a poster for The Marvels. On it stands a trio of theatrically illuminated buff women in superhero suits, each displaying a stoic and grim expression as they stare confidently at an unseen foe. It is entirely unnecessary for the publicity team to write woman power across this very conspicuous poster. These are the infamous strong female characters that I have grown up with, an archetype that communicates a stark shift in our culture's vision of the ideal woman. Curious to understand the factors surrounding this new view of women, I explored the history of the 4 feminist movements of America, their goals, and the legal and cultural changes they achieved. The first wave of feminism focused on gaining women the right to vote and to own property, the freedom to voice their opinions on government and society, and improvements in women's education. It began in 1848, when feminists Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton organized the first women's rights convention in Seneca Falls, New York. There, they wrote the Declaration of Sentiments, insisting that men and women stand equal before God, the limitations society imposed on women should be stripped away, women should be permitted to occupy any station they can competently fill, and men and women should be regarded as equal in capabilities and responsibilities, thus possessing equal human rights. The first wave endured until August 18, 1920, when the ratification of the 19th Amendment permitted white women the right to vote. Following World War II, there was a huge marriage boom in the 1950s. The nuclear family was idealized, and women returned to being homemakers after occupying so much of the workforce during the war, now discouraged from seeking higher education or careers. While many women found joy as wives and mothers, many were yet dissatisfied, but could not articulate why. Feminist Betty Friedan interviewed housewives across the country in an attempt to define this problem, and in 1963, she published The Feminine Mystique. During the 1950s, society believed true femininity was found in marriage and childrearing only. Women were dissuaded from cultivating their talents, pursuing passions or careers outside the domestic sphere, or making use of higher education. Friedan concluded that these stifling restrictions were to blame for many women's dissatisfaction. The feminine mystique sparked the second wave of feminism. From the early 1960s through the 1970s, the second wave sought to redefine these traditional notions of gender roles. Women began to push out of the home and into the workplace, and fought for the ratification of the Equal Pay Act in 1963, which, quote, stipulated that women could no longer be paid less than men for doing comparable work at the same job, unquote. The second wave also led the battle for women's sexual liberation. Women wanted to engage freely in sex without the fear of unwanted pregnancies. In 1960, the FDA approved the first contraceptive pill, and in 1973, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of a woman's right to abort her unborn children. Meanwhile, authors Germaine Greer, Kate Millett, and Susan Brown Miller helped women comprehend and validate their sexual desires and seek justice for sexual harassment and assault. The third wave followed in the 1990s. The call for a new feminist movement came after the Anita Hill hearings in 1991, when, quote, attorney Anita Hill testified against U.S. Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas for sexual harassment, unquote. When Thomas was appointed a Supreme Court justice despite Hill's testimony, the women of America began to bring more public attention to sexual assault and advocated for more female representation in Congress. In the 1992 elections, a new record of 27 women were elected to Congress. The fourth wave of feminism began in the early 2000s as a continuation of the third wave. The fourth wave is distinguished by an increased number of pro-choice rallies, which advocated for unrestricted rights to abortion, and the use of social media for feminist activism. The third and fourth waves sought to fight the abuse of women in society by creating platforms on which women could unite and speak out. It is undeniable that feminism has benefited both sexes by securing greater equality for women. However, the second, third, and fourth waves of feminism also discouraged men and women from pursuing godly romantic relationships, undermining the biblical pattern of male initiation and female response by blurring the distinction between the genders, and encouraging sexual promiscuity. First, this thesis will defend the biblical picture of romantic relationships and marriage. Marriage is a partnership between two equal image bearers of God. However, the Bible does give a man leadership over a woman in matters of spiritual headship. Husbands are to be the spiritual heads of their wives in imitation of Christ as the head of the church, his figurative bride. God set a precedent for marriage by the order and manner in which he created the two sexes and joined them together. Adam was formed, then Eve was fashioned from the man, for the man, brought to the man, and named by the man. Thus, God established a pattern of a godly man initiating and a godly woman responding. God created the woman with a special and meticulous care that he did not afford the man. The Hebrew word bara, used for Adam's forming, means to make something routine without excessive care. However, the Hebrew word bana, used when God made Eve from Adam's rib, means to fashion something complex with great attention. For a man to pursue, woo, and win a woman's heart is one way to pay compliment to her as the special or fashioned sex. Thus, chivalric gestures are also biblical. From holding a door open or helping a woman down from a carriage to the legendary acts of knights errant for endangered damsels, these acts are supported by God's depiction of how he specially fashioned women, and they carry with them the understanding that women are set apart from men and deserve to be treated with a special type of reverence. Of course, when a man initiates a romantic relationship, he must do so in a godly way. If he is domineering and suppressive, he rebels against God's design of a partnership between equal image bearers. No woman is obligated to follow that type of man. The man does not take initiative because the woman is incapable of doing so, nor does he pull out her chair for her because she cannot move it herself. Rather, the man acknowledges the woman's autonomy and capability and offers these gestures out of love and respect. A scene from the book Jubilant encapsulates this perfectly. The character Kelta is an extremely competent female warrior and sailor, with male shipmates who adamantly defend her abilities. One evening, Kelta visits a town with a man named Ren, and as they walk back to the dock in the dark, the town's shadier personalities emerge. Both Kelta and Ren understand that she is fully capable of protecting herself. Nevertheless, Ren offers her his arm. Far from being offended by this gesture, Kelta wishes the men of her ship who want to avoid implying that she needs their protection would show her similar respectful gestures. Kelta did not feel weaker or less capable than Ren when she took his arm, but felt the honor a man affords a woman as the fashioned sex. However, feminism has rejected God's standard for romantic relationships. Second, modern feminism has undermined this biblical pattern by promoting the idea that all psychological and social differences between the genders are social constructs, so it does not matter who takes initiative in romantic relationships. For too long, society taught that men and women must embody certain attributes. Men must be confident, brave, and strong, while women must be compassionate, gentle, and nurturing, leading to an opinion of women as the inferior sex. Feminists rightly argued that both genders can embody every attribute and should be treated as equally capable. But in their attempt to secure gender equality, they began arguing that the genders were equivalent. Ideas that promoted the dissolution of gender distinction also denied the distinction that the scripture makes between men and women. Men ought to initiate and women ought to respond. Men were called to be less assertive and chivalrous, lest they implied women need their assistance. Feminism discouraged men from expressing healthy and biblical masculinity and their willingness to initiate a relationship. Studies show that, quote, about half of single men have not approached a woman in the past year, while in the entire data set, 29% of men said they never approached a woman in person before, unquote. However, a woman's desire for a man to take the initiative is a near universal phenomenon. Studies reveal that, quote, 74% of women aged 25 and below want to be approached more, and 77% in the full 18 to 30 cohort, unquote. In Iron John, a book about men, Robert Bly argues that authentic masculinity includes a type of wildness that femininity does not possess, but men have been taught passivity in order to let women take the initiative. Quote, "Some women want a passive man if they want a man at all. The church wants a tamed man. They are called priests. The university wants a domesticated man. They are called tenure-track people. The corporation wants a sanitized, hairless, shallow man," unquote. Confusion results because both sexes are trying to be the initiator in courtship, but that is impossible. God specially designed men to initiate in relationships, but feminism insisted that women should initiate, or at the very least, reject that initiation from men. In turn, men have retreated from this masculine role. So society is left with two genders attempting and failing to fill the role of men in relationships. Men lack the confidence to approach women but wish they could, and women believe it is a weakness to follow the lead of a man, but still want to deep down. Third, feminism encouraged female promiscuity under the guise of sexual liberation and empowerment, leading to a host of negative effects for both men and women. Traditionally, society viewed women as inactive participants in sex, as objects of desire and sexual gratification for men. In The Female Eunuch, Germaine Greer argued that women must explore their sexuality and what brings them pleasure in order to become active and independent sexual agents. This spurred some women to engage in more casual sex with multiple partners. The number of sexual partners in the US rose steadily from the beginning of the 20th century, peaking in the second wave of feminism and plateauing in subsequent decades. Quote, "The median number of partners was 1 for those born in the 1910s and 20s, 2 for those in the 1930s cohort, 3 for those born in the 40s, 4 for those born in the 50s and 60s, and 3 for those born in the 70s, 80s, and 90s," unquote. Feminism sold sexual promiscuity as sexual liberation, but brought grave effects on mental health. When sex is used to satiate an immediate physical appetite, there is no genuine emotional connection between the partners. This can cause, quote, "anxiety and depression. The constant cycle of short-term relationships can lead to feelings of instability and insecurity," unquote. Sex was never designed to be a casual activity. God created it to be the sacred seal of marriage between a man and a woman. Sex is robbed of its sacred nature when it is not reserved for one special person, but done any time for the sake of satisfying lust. Many people engaged in a promiscuous lifestyle report feeling empty. Quote, "Each girl you meet and have sex with, it's like you're giving her part of your soul. And at some point, it's like you've broken your soul into a lot of fragments and you're giving it away, and you feel empty because you don't have a special relationship with anyone," unquote. Those who engage in promiscuity make themselves the property of all instead of reserving themselves for one genuine connection. This cannot lead to enduring fulfillment. First, the biblical picture of initiation and response, when executed in a godly manner, is a healthy pattern for male-female relationships. However, many feminists may argue that it is not healthy because the Bible commands an unbalanced, misogynistic system in which men lead and women must submit. This issue stems from Ephesians 5:22, which says, "Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, of his body, of which he is the Savior," unquote. Feminists argue that this depiction of marriage cannot be between equals when men hold the power and women must yield to their husbands' whims. However, Ephesians 5:21 through 26 specifically designates a pattern of male spiritual headship within a marriage. These verses stipulate that men should be the heads of their wives in the same way that Christ is the head of the church, to lead them in spiritual matters and provide a godly example of faithfulness and sacrifice. Christ, the head of the body of believers, is a man. God designates men to be the spiritual heads of each marriage and family, to follow Christ's precedent. As Christ sacrificially died for his bride, so husbands are to love their wives. Men bear this great responsibility. If the husband is not first Christ-like in his headship, he cannot demand submission from his wife. Contrary to what feminists argue, this pattern does not place a larger burden on women. God asks hard things of both partners in a marriage. Women are asked to submit to their husbands, and men are commanded to be Christ-like to their wives. Feminists may also argue that women should not adopt a biblical pattern for romantic relationships, since historically, verses on marriage were used to defend women's oppression. They claim the Bible justifies misogyny and brings harm that outweighs the supposed benefits. Sadly, Instead of honoring women as equal image bearers, male church leaders have historically used passages like Ephesians 5, 1 Peter 3, and 1 Timothy 2 to mandate that women be completely subordinate to all men. The Reformation's emphasis on marriage limited women's roles to marriage and childbirth, placing them, quote, firmly under the headship of their husbands, unquote. The church demanded that women not only respect their husbands as their spiritual heads, but to silently bow to their husbands in every matter. This misconception deprived wives of their freedom to speak their minds or influence their husbands' opinions and decisions. However, while sinners in the church have employed the authority of the scriptures to subjugate women, these were misinterpretations of the Bible that do not accurately reflect its teachings on male-female relationships. Some men use their spiritual authority to establish complete dominance over women, claiming that the Bible gave them that right. However, God grants men the privilege of spiritual headship within the framework of following Christ's example of sacrificial love for his church. A man cannot demand the right to lead. Rather, he must earn that honor by proving himself a selfless partner who strives to love his wife as Christ loves his bride. The fact that sinners have twisted God's good design to serve their own devices does not diminish the truth and goodness of the pattern the Bible provides. Second, the feminist movements denied the inherent differences between men and women, insisting that unique expressions of masculinity and femininity are social constructs. Thus, either gender can take romantic initiative. Feminists may argue that de-emphasizing the differences between the sexes highlights that women are just as capable as men. For too long, women were considered mentally and physically inferior to men and only allowed roles that conformed to society's image of femininity, and thus barred from many opportunities that men enjoyed. By blurring male-female distinctions, feminists freed women to pursue roles previously only accessible to men. However, taken to this extreme, both men and women were left with emotional uncertainty surrounding their identities. While gaining more equality and opportunity, mistaking gender equality for gender equivalence discouraged men and women from pursuing unique expressions of their gender, and thus driving them away from God's design of initiation and response. In an attempt to tear down stereotypes, feminists encouraged men and women to embody the attributes stereotypically associated with the opposite gender. For example, modern media depicts the archetype of the girl boss or the strong female character, women who are effortlessly strong and confident, right about everything, and ready to easily beat the men who underestimate them. By contrast, the men in these stories are often arrogant misogynists, vengefully bested by the girl bosses, or incompetent and passive fools, who elevate the female lead by contrast. The Bible specifically assigns initiation and response to men and women respectively, but feminists have pushed gender equivalence, or rather gender role subversion, to the extent that men hesitate to initiate. Third, in feminism's attempt to make women empowered sexual agents equal with men, it encouraged promiscuity, leading to widespread dissatisfaction and depression. Feminists argue that promiscuity was their way of breaking free from society's sexual restrictions. For much of American history, the burden of chastity was laid on women alone, while men slept around without social repercussions. A man was not considered ruined if he lost his virginity before marriage, but became the experienced instigator for sex in marriage. By educating women about their sexual anatomy and assuring them that their sexual desires were valid and normal, feminism fought against this double standard and rejected the idea that a woman's value depended on her purity. However, the solution to this issue was not to lower the standard of women's sexual behavior to that of men's, but to demand that men be held accountable to the same level of purity as women. Quote, "The result of abolishing the double standard has been to do away with any standard at all," unquote. As is clear in God's word, chastity has inherent value for all. As God does, society should insist upon equally high standards of purity for both sexes. Humanity has never successfully acknowledged biblical truth alongside the best of feminism. Our world has known pagan cultures devoid of God's law and rights for women, as well as civilizations that acknowledge God's word as the highest authority, but twisted the Bible to justify the oppression of women. Now, our culture has equal rights for women, but renounces the Bible as misogynistic. Modern feminists have won copious opportunities for women, but at the cost of denying God. I do not advocate for a return to before feminism's victories, yet it is tragic that feminists reject God in their desire to denounce those who twisted God's word and harmed women. It is not God or the Bible that is flawed, but sinful people. With God as the foundation of our culture, we could claim the corporate blessings of both the benefits of feminism and God's design for male-female relationships. It is my fervent desire that all Christians stand firm for women's rights, but do not compromise on the truth of God's word. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Coffeen. I must say, as one who mentored you as you wrote this thesis, I enjoyed revisiting my past and for what that was worth. But anyway, you mentioned social constructs and the way that male and female roles are viewed as social constructs today. Can you point to any ways in which social constructs are evident in Scripture or have been embedded in Scripture or have shaped the way Scripture presents the male and the female, whether apart or in relationship?
Yes, the Bible is definitely written in cultures that were very patriarchal in nature. So, for example, the divorce laws in the Old Testament were misinterpreted to say that God justified divorce, when rather those divorce laws were written because the culture in which the Bible was written believed that women were property and men could divorce them at any time and just leave them out on the streets. So God created those divorce laws as a system of protection for women, that the guy had to give his wife a certificate of divorce. So that is one of the ways the law of the Bible has been shaped by the culture in which it was written. In addition, some of the phrasing in the New Testament about men and women's roles, like women as the weaker sex, women are saved through childbearing, communicates very much to me the culture at the time the Bible was written as being patriarchal in nature.
So can we argue that these biblical values have been shaped by social constructs?
I would say that the Bible was written specifically to a culture with those types of social constructs. I don't think that the truth of the Bible is minimized by the culture that it was written to, but I think that the language of the scriptures is definitely affected by the audience to which it was written.
Okay. Now you did mention the good of feminism in that it has ensured, at least tried to ensure, that men and women deserve to be viewed equally and with equal rights across the board. And yet you say this is good, but it lacks a foundation, like a biblical foundation. Now, would it be completely unfortunate if men and women were viewed equally with equal rights apart from any belief in Scripture?
Would it be negative if men and women were considered equal apart from the Bible?
Would it be okay if they were viewed as equal people with equal abilities without attaching that to a perspective on Scripture?
So I believe that the Bible has authority over everyone and every culture because God is the creator of everyone and deserves worship from everyone. So I do believe that the Bible is applicable to every situation. However, if someone came to the conclusion that the genders were equal and should be treated equally outside of the scripture, I still think that is a good thing. Obviously, they're not grounding their belief in scripture, but they are coming to a truth from their own rationality and their own logic and their own observation of the world around them and the fact that men and women are equally valuable parts of humanity. So I wouldn't disagree with their conclusion, but I would obviously encourage them to incorporate the Bible into their worldview.
Okay. Would you say that the feminist movement, just overall, like broadly speaking, like has elevated women to the point where you believe God wishes for them to be?
Yes, I believe that in Genesis, God created women to be man's helper, and the word for helper in Genesis is not it does not carry a meaning of inferiority. It carries a meaning of equality, or even is used in other places in the Old Testament to refer to God as the ultimate helper. So that word helper definitely communicates the message of equality, that women should work to subdue the earth alongside men and have equal opportunities to do so, because Eve was created to be Adam's helper in the governance of the garden and the governance of creation. So feminism opening up opportunities for women to have the same levels of contributions to society as men do, I feel like definitely aligns with God's intention for men and women working together equally in the governance of creation.
Okay, and so like overall, you're arguing that the fruits of feminism are good, but they would be better if they were like embedded in the idea of God.
So in my thesis, I'm actually drawing a distinction between different things that feminism has achieved. So in my thesis, I make it very clear that I appreciate the equality that feminism has won for women and the opportunities they've opened up for us. And those things are, in my opinion, undisputably good for both men and women. In my thesis, I am isolating some cultural effects that feminism has brought on the relationships between men and women and how they view their gender identities and their roles in their relationships, romantic relationships together. So those, in my mind, are completely distinct, and the former is an amazing benefit to our society.
First of all, can you pronounce your first name for me?
Karis.
Karis. Okay, so the X is a K. Okay. So when you described the four movements, I began life when the second movement was beginning. So the first movement proceeded when I was born, but I had firsthand knowledge and observation of those last three feminist movements. My question to you is, you're describing feminism almost in a secular culture and the failures of it, bringing it into the evangelical culture. Is there a comparison of, for example, the movements that have taken place in the last few decades regarding complementarianism and egalitarianism?
Yes, my research definitely focused on feminism in the secular culture.
Right.
So I am not super familiar on evangelical feminism. I definitely wanted to focus my thesis on a critique of non-Christian feminist rhetoric. However, I'm actually curious if you had an example of some of the thoughts of evangelical feminism. I might be able to speak to that, but I'm not super familiar with it.
I think of proponents, for example, of egalitarianism. There's Dr. Belzikian, from Willow Creek Church, is a big proponent of that. And others, seminaries, for example, seminaries that have modern evangelical seminaries that have accepted women in their programs, stipulate that there is such an equality between men and women that it kind of the differences are not brought out in their views.
I'm sure the American church, in fact, I know the American church has been greatly affected by the four waves of feminism as cultural opinions of the worth and capabilities of women has shifted for the better. I believe that the church has been allowing women into more roles of leadership within their church. I don't personally agree with female ordination, but we have seen an upsurgence of female ordination within the past 20 or so years, and also just allowing women more of a say in the trajectory of the church in female-led Bible studies. I feel like churches have been a lot better at, gotten a lot better at setting aside women to lead women in the study of the scriptures and to disciple them. So those are some of the positive effects I've definitely seen in the church.
Very good. Thank you, Karis.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you.
Again, I could talk to you for hours about this. I'll limit my questions to two. One is, you said there was undisputable good from feminism. I'm going to stretch you a little bit. Is there any negative consequence that you can think of in women voting, in women proliferating the workforce, in that kind of not even girl boss mentality, just simply us enjoying, really, the benefits of that feminism? Can you think of negative effects to that?
Yes, and I'm going to qualify this before I say it. When I say these are negative effects, I mean they're objectively negative for the society. I don't think any of the women are doing wrong or sinning when this is happening. Specifically, the decline in the birth rate and the decline in marriage and marriage happening later. I don't think the women are doing anything wrong by pursuing careers and putting work first at times. I think that children and marriage are blessings. They are good things, but they are not the only good things in the world. And our society has been greatly blessed by women using their intelligence and talents to enter the workforce. I'm sure we've all here been blessed by female doctors and female teachers and female leaders in our workplace who may not have been in those roles prior to feminism. I'm not saying that it's wrong that they're doing that, but the natural effect has been women having fewer children because they are working more, so they simply have less time, maybe getting married later because they are focusing on building their careers first and getting that financial stability before they get married. I don't think those things bode well for our culture, but I don't really think there's a way to get around them at the moment if we want women to have those amazing opportunities to be in the workforce, which I don't think we should sacrifice. I don't think I would want to sacrifice those. So I think that's a good thing, but it does have necessary consequences.
But isn't that very, the way you couched what you said, doesn't that go back to Genesis 1, right? And I'm that person too. I want all of the freedoms that you're talking about, and yet I'm not sure that those freedoms have yielded only benefit. And I would even argue, I think if I were going to be really honest, that there's a lot of detrimental results of that, even though I want it, but Genesis 1 tells us that we're going to want that, right?
Yeah, and I think that's unavoidable in any sort of area where society is making advancements. Think of the Industrial Revolution. I mean, that got us inventions and an economic boom, but it also got us air pollution and factory injuries and changed the way of life for so many people. Like those weren't good things, but they were consequences of our society developing. I think that there were great things that came out of the Industrial Revolution for the American economy, but I mean, there's going to be negative consequences for any sort of forward-thinking mentality you have.
My last question for you is this idea of you talked about girl bosses in media. Well, now we see a lot of trad wives, right, in media.
Do we? Where?
It's a whole thing on social media.
Okay, good
right?
to hear.
So lots of
the trad
Instagram reels of trad wives promoting that kind of that it is elegant to stay home, that it is good and right to be mamas to your kiddos. What do you?
Yeah.
You're surprised that happens, so I'm not quite sure if you have a critique of it.
I was surprised when you said it was in media. I definitely have seen it lots on social media, however, but not quite as much in like films and TV shows. But in regards to your question, I think that there's going to be reactions to extremes all the time. So the extreme reaction to the 1950s was everyone get out of the house, everyone go into the workforce, men are stupid, men oppress us. And then that happened for a while, and then the reaction to that was maybe now is more we should start acknowledging the joys of being a housewife again. And I'm not saying either pursuit is better or worse. I'm saying that limiting society to one or the other is a very restrictive and unhealthy mindset to have for women. Women should be encouraged to explore a multitude of possibilities and futures for themselves. So I definitely think that what you're noticing in that trend in the social media could be a reaction to a few decades of people criticizing childbearing and the work of a housewife. It could be a reaction against that. And I definitely don't think it's good to demonize that. I think that's probably what you're picking up on. Yes, I think that there are. It can be a fulfilling life for a lot of people, but for a lot of people, it is not fulfilling to just do that. And that was why a lot of women were dissatisfied during the 1950s, is because society said, that is your only option. That is femininity, that is true femininity, this is what you need to do. And for a lot of women, that's not the only thing they want in their life.
Thanks for your work. I also could probably talk to you about this for hours. It's a subject I'm passionate about. In the essay concerning technology, Heidegger describes technology as something that reframes one's experience of life. And certainly with the introduction of the contraceptive pill, we see the rise of a kind of tech that has reframed a lot of how we experience and observe life. So how much of our present moment has been influenced by the introduction of that tech? And then as a follow-up question, how much of feminism has really been enabled solely because of the fact that now we can make the procreative element of intimacy an elective element? Does that make sense?
Yes. So to your first question was how do we?
Yeah, you're asking me to remember my first question. My first question
how
was
feminism affected by the contraceptive pill?
How our whole,
Right.
a very general, just how's our whole cultural moment influenced by the introduction of the pill?
Yes. So I definitely say married couples have more control over when they have children, how many children they have, because as you said, the reproductive element of intimacy is now more an elective element. I think that's a good thing that married couples have more of an ability to decide when and how many children they have, especially for women who are higher risk for pregnancies, to be able to make that safer for them. As far as just the cultural climate, I definitely mentioned in my paper how a lot of feminists wanted the contraceptive pill to be legalized so they could have more casual sex without the potential of having a child out of that fling or whatever. So I do think that has facilitated people being promiscuous. I think people are going to be promiscuous no matter what you do. So I'm not saying the contraceptive pill was a bad invention, but I do think that I actually have a quote in my paper that the ratification or the legalization of that pill really sort of freed up the sexual culture of America, and just overall made it a lot more forgiving towards promiscuity and multiple partners and polyamory and homosexuality. It just like overall really affected that. As far as how much of feminism would only be possible with the contraceptive pill, I definitely think as far as opening up careers and opportunities for women, if you are married and you can't control when you get pregnant, that's going to keep you away from the workforce a lot more than if you have a pill that is very reliable, is a very reliable way to stop the conception of children. So that I think definitely has helped women have a lot more long-term career opportunities because they can control better control when they can have children. I do think that is a good thing, but obviously that leads to lower birth rates, which I don't think is a good thing. So it's this paradox of which do we want for our culture, and I definitely think that it's better to have the freedom to pursue the opportunities you want and the freedom to decide when you want to have children than to have the higher birth rates but not have that freedom. So.
You seem to represent the view that there are certain things scripturally that certain roles that women are not to fulfill. So in other words, there's certain things women can't do and there's certain things that women can do. When we're saying that there are certain things that women can't do, is it your position that they can't do those things because they are not allowed by God to do those things, or is it your position that they are not capable? So does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So in my paper, I think I make it very clear that I believe that the only role the Bible explicitly commands women not to fill is roles of spiritual headship in the church. God nowhere limits women from filling secular or military roles, as we see with Deborah and Esther. They're both secular leaders that God put in place for his people. But in his word, he does specifically say that ordained leaders in the church are to be like one man faithful to his wife. You know the verse. So I have it somewhere in my notes. But yes, so I do believe the Bible says specifically that ordained leaders in the church are to be men, and especially also to mimic the precedent of Christ as the male head of the church. That precedent is important to uphold. And me as a woman, I don't feel insulted by that limitation. I think that it's a good precedent to follow.
To clarify my question, though, let's take women's ordination then. Ought women to be barred from ordination because the role of a pastor is something they are not capable of doing, or because God does not allow them to do it?
I think that women would absolutely be capable of ministering to a church in the way that pastors and elders do. I think that it would definitely lead to a unique sort of church leadership that we don't normally see, but I do think they would be capable of doing it, since women have the capability to be intelligent and godly and have the ability to lead. So I think it is definitely more of God specifically wants men in those roles of authority within the church in order to uphold the precedent of Christ as the male head of the church. So it is more that they are not allowed.
So why uphold the precedent of Christ? Why is it important that a pastor be male if there's nothing kind of grounded in reality that where a woman could step into that role and completely fulfill it? It almost sounds like the issue of sex is totally immaterial to whether or not someone can dispatch the role of a pastor.
I think that gender is very important. God is a masculine God. Christ is the masculine head of the church. And in the Bible, it is very clear that God values precedence. God set a precedent for the week by making the earth in 6 days and resting on the seventh. He set a precedence for heterosexual relationships by making one man and one woman who got married. He set a precedence for the death penalty when in the chapter that Cain kills Abel. So precedents are very important to God and to the scriptures. And I don't think that we should minimize them, just like we wouldn't minimize them in a court system.
Okay. So it sounds like there's nothing ontological that you're getting at. Well, all right, so one last question, because I know time is short. I want to piggyback on something that Dr. Marsh brought up, which is about, for instance, these different moments in the scriptures where you have this sequence of, for instance, like God is the glory of Christ, or rather Christ is the glory of man, Christ the glory of God, women the glory of man. That like there's this kind of hierarchical description, or you have Peter in his letter describing women as the weaker vessel, or St. Paul in the pastoral epistles saying that it's his ruling that women ought to be keepers at home. He describes them as oikodespotes, which literally means house despots. So like, is it your contention that these passages that describe, let's just focus on the Peter one, because that's the one that you brought up in your answer to Dr. Marsh, the weaker vessel. Is it your position that St. Peter's giving expression to just a purely cultural perspective, or is it true that women are the weaker vessel?
Yeah, so I think if we take the passage literally, you can take it both literally and figuratively. Literally, women are weaker physically. That's indisputable. So live with your wives in an understanding way. Show honor to them as the weaker vessel. I do think that, I mentioned the value of chivalry in my paper. I do think that men have an obligation to protect women as the physically weaker part of humanity. I'm not disputing that. As far as another interpretation of it, I think that this verse emphasizes more women's equality in salvation and her really precious status in mankind, because the rest of the verse says they are heirs with you of the grace of life so that your prayers may not be hindered. I don't think that this verse is trying to say that women are less valuable because they're maybe physically weaker, they're not incompetent. I think that it's trying to say men respect and look after women as the weaker vessel, but remember that they're co-heirs with you in salvation and don't lord that naturally weaker disposition over them. I think it's more of a warning to men to still respect women despite their advantage over them.
Good job, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, we are ready to reconvene. Next up is Sophia Urton.
As I peeked through the curtain of my first high school musical, a thrill of excitement shot through me. The audience was so large it overflowed the theater balcony and caused a line out the double doors. Just like the many people, ranging from grandparents to little girls dressed in Ariel costumes, who came to see our performance of The Little Mermaid, I too grew up enjoying the magic of Disney movies. Yet, as I continued to anticipate each new Disney film, I noticed their quality deteriorating. Thus, I wanted to answer the question, what has Disney done to leave excellent stories behind? Here's some background. Walt Disney was an entrepreneur and animation visionary who founded Walt Disney Company in 1923. This thesis will examine 8 films throughout the various eras of Disney, with Encanto, Raya and the Last Dragon, and Strange World representing the modern era of Disney, with a focus on the difference between the pre-modern era and modern era films. The first film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, was released in 1938. As the first long-form color animated movie in history, the plot is based upon the Grimm's fairy tale, but with fewer scary scenes and more humor. After the release of the movie, Disney went from being a failing company in debt to a company with millions of dollars in profits. Walt Disney stated, "With the profits of Snow White, I built this studio." The second film is Sleeping Beauty, released in 1959. Similar to Snow White, it also follows the Grimm's fairy tale, but with more developed characters. The third film, Beauty and the Beast, was released in 1991. The plot follows Belle, an intelligent country girl who consents to stay with the Beast in her father's stead. She and the Beast subsequently fall in love, and after defeating the villain of Gaston, Belle saves the Beast with true love, and the two live happily ever after. The fourth film is Lion King, released in 1994. The plot of Lion King resembles biblical narratives, with Simba's banishment due to the jealousy and covetousness of his uncle Scar, paralleling the feelings and actions of Joseph's brothers. Just as Moses required a vision of Yahweh in the burning bush, Simba gains wisdom and calling from a vision of his father. Likewise, Lion King echoes themes found in Hamlet, with the king's evil brother Scar committing fratricide regicide. Lion King ends with the return of Simba, bringing peace to the savannah. The fifth film is Frozen, released in 2013. The plot of Frozen has its origins in The Snow Queen, a story by Hans Christian Andersen. However, Disney changed the evil Snow Queen into Elsa, a sympathetic, kind sister and queen of Arendelle. It also created the character of Anna, Elsa's sister. While the freezing of Anna's heart by Elsa was retained from the original Snow Queen, it is accidental in Frozen. Interestingly, Frozen focused on sisterly love instead of romantic love, while still including a happily ever after romance for Anna. The sixth film is Encanto, released in 2021. The plot of Encanto and the movie itself focused on representation and self-expression, not only of different family members in different ages, but also people from different ethnic backgrounds. The story of Encanto follows Mirabel, a girl born into a family of people blessed with magical gifts. She, however, is not given a gift by the magical house. Throughout the movie, Mirabel attempts to discover why the magic in the house is dying, and the action culminates with the house crumbling to the ground. Mirabel discovers that her grandmother's pressure on each family member to be perfect created the rifts between the family members. Once the rifts are healed in the finale of the movie, the house is restored. Mirabel realizes that she was not given a gift by the magical house because she is the gift to her family. The seventh film is Raya and the Last Dragon, released in 2021. Raya and the Last Dragon was created to focus on ethnic and female representation, both within the film itself and the team which created it. The plot follows Raya, daughter of one of the chiefs of their land, Kumandra. Her father possesses the Dragon Gem, which is the only power able to fight off an evil black force turning people into stone. The Dragon Gem is broken in an attack and spread across different kingdoms. Raya finds the last dragon, Sisu, and builds a group of misfits around her to fight another tribe who possess a key portion of the Dragon Gem. Mistrust in everyone leads to Sisu's death, and the world begins to be absorbed by the evil black force. However, through reconciliation, Raya and the daughter of another tribe work together to restore the Dragon Gem and banish the evil Black Force. The 8th and final film is Strange World, released in 2022. Its plot centers around Disney's first openly gay main character, Ethan Clade, who belongs to a family of adventurers in his outer space-like world. The movie follows his many antics as he discovers evil creatures inside the planet. The story also contains a second plot about a special substance called Pando, discovered by Ethan's father, which fuels their society. After a breach between father and son, due to Ethan's wish to explore further throughout the strange world, the duo fight and then reconcile. In the process, they discover that their world is built upon the shell of a cosmic turtle, and Pando is slowly killing it. Therefore, at the end of the movie, Ethan and his boyfriend explore more of the strange world while his family warns about the dangers of Pando. Strange World was an immense failure and lost Disney around $100 million. Now, you may be wondering, why were films like Strange World so unsuccessful? This thesis contends that, in part, it is due to the lack of transcendent narrative. Transcendent values are those rooted in biblical truth, which in turn promotes virtue. Therefore, as Disney moved away from transcendent values and narratives in its animated films, and instead began trying to reflect and emulate cultural trends, the movies became markedly worse. This is seen in 3 main areas. First, the rise of excessive individualism. Second, a discarding of transcendent plots. And third, a focus on cultural trends. First, the rise of excessive individualism in Disney has led to single-trait, flat characters. Disney films preceding the modern era displayed excellent character development. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs portrays the title character as kind and selfless as she cares for those around her. These traits are contrasted to the constant selfishness of the evil queen, who attempts murder multiple times to preserve her title as fairest in the land. The Lion King similarly rebukes selfishness, as Simba initially refuses to help his lion pride because he is content in his jungle home. Once confronted, he repents of his self-centeredness and saves his lion pride, becoming a hero. In contrast, modern Disney movies have strayed from these timeless, well-rounded characters. Raya and the Last Dragon's protagonist, Raya, has one primary characteristic. She mistrusts everything in the world. Throughout most of the story, Raya's mistrust in other people is only confirmed. She and Sisu are cheated, backstabbed, and robbed by the characters they encounter. Through this, Raya's character remains stagnant. Her beliefs are not challenged, meaning she has no need for personal development and no character growth. In contrast to the idea of transcendent love, which leads to selflessness, Raya's central trait is also not a virtuous one. She is mistrustful of the rest of the world, which leads her to act selfishly. Encanto suffers from the same tunnel-vision character writing, as each of the main sisters display one primary character trait. They are all self-centered. While each of them may help others at times, it is for personal gain or affirmation, not for the joy of serving others. The protagonist, Mirabel, reiterates her dream of receiving a gift from the house, even as the house and her family crumbles. After the house is rebuilt and the family is reunited, Mirabel says, "I see me, all of me." This individualism removes much of the nobility of Mirabel's reconciliation of her family, which is shown to be a quest for self-discovery instead of stemming from her love of her family. Strange World has the most glaring character development issues of all modern-era Disney movies. Much of the main character, Ethan's time on screen, is devoted to talking about his sexual orientation. Thus, he does not have a distinctive personality or character growth, nor does the movie express his desires aside from his gay love interest. When Ethan does express his desires later in the movie, the viewer struggles to find any basis for them in his previously established life. For example, when Ethan fights with his father over his future career path, he says he wants to be an explorer and not a farmer. But he has never once showed that he loves exploration. Thus, the single-trait characters of the modern era are markedly worse than the timeless characters written before. Second, by discarding transcendent values and thereby transcendent narratives, Disney undermined the plots of its films. A transcendent narrative must be well-written and instill wisdom. A story without a transcendent narrative may hold temporary cultural sway as it adheres to the transient cultural tides, but it will not provide lasting guidance toward human flourishing. Older Disney films like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Sleeping Beauty, Beauty and the Beast, and Lion King promoted the values of kindness, friendship, compassion, love, and perseverance in the face of insurmountable odds. However, Encanto and Raya and the Last Dragon focus more on the individual. For example, in Encanto, the house is dying because the family members cannot express themselves in the way they desire to protect the family's image and unity. While this does address true family dynamics and pressures of life conforming to others' needs or desires, the shift in focus is subtle. Instead of family healing being the key focus of the movie, the moral of the story is finding one's place of belonging at all costs, a message which flows from modern individualism. A transcendent narrative must also have a well-written plot, containing a clear goal, fueled by the main character or characters, and centered around a main conflict. Aristotle avows 3 points: the self-contained story, the reversal of fortune, and a cohesive setting and background for the plot. One key element of the self-contained story is the purposeful nature of introducing plot threads. Everything in the plot should be moving towards an end goal. Freytag's pyramid follows these Aristotelian plot rules. It provides a simple framework. Starting with the exposition, the pyramid grows toward the rising action, and then at the climax. It then concludes with the falling action and resolution. To demonstrate, Snow White adheres to Freytag's pyramid. It begins with exposition of the characters and their backstories. In the rising action, Snow White is driven out of the palace by the evil queen, into the forest, and eventually into the dwarves' home. In the climax, the evil queen, as the old hag, gives Snow White the poison apple and she dies. As the story grows to the resolution, the prince finds Snow White, kisses her, and in a lovely reversal of fortune, brings her back to life. The movie then ends with a happily ever after. Sleeping Beauty, Beauty and the Beast, Lion King, and Frozen all adhere to this plot structure. Both Raya and the Last Dragon and Encanto also adhere to the Freytag methods of writing, though they do not adhere to the Aristotelian value of the plot purposely moving towards the climax. Therefore, both films suffer from scenes which do not drive the story towards its conclusion, introducing new ideas which confuse the audience or simply cause the audience to lose interest. Strange World, on the other hand, does not adhere to the necessary rules of transcendent narrative. In terms of Freytag's pyramid, the story begins with exposition, but then evolves into 2 separate plots. One plot is focused on the father-son relationship and eventually grandfather-grandson relationship of the 3 central characters. The other plot revolves around saving Pando. Due to this, Strange World has 2 climaxes. One climax pertains to Pando and the revelation that it is destroying the world. The other climax is a falling out between the boy, Ethan, and his father. However, these 2 climaxes, happening close together but pertaining to 2 different plots, confuse the watcher and force a narrative resolution without background. The movie, by trying to tell 2 stories, instead ensured that neither was given the audience's full emotional and mental investment, and instead caused dissonance and confusion for the audience, displaying the degradation of modern Disney films. Third, Disney shifted focus from creating excellent, transcendent content to efforts to emulate prevailing social trends. In doing so, Disney lost its anchor. In 2020, the company introduced the Reimagine Tomorrow initiative, tied to its internal diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, programs. Displaying these internal initiatives, Disney stated that DEI would be the weightiest category in its other performance factors when giving out its annual bonus. To demonstrate another instance of DEI expenditure, between 2018 and 2020, Disney spent an average of $528 million per year in order to partner with diverse businesses. Along with this spending, Disney also pledged $5 million in support to organizations advancing social justice. To put this in perspective, Disney could have funded over an entire year of animated movie production with just this admitted DEI spending. While it is good and necessary to pursue and hire those with the best talent, Disney began to place emphasis on who was making the movie instead of the quality of the film. For example, when promoting Raya and the Last Dragon, Disney focused on the leadership and team which created it, a team which happened to consist of almost exclusively women of color, instead of promoting the actual film. In recent years, Disney has responded to low audience satisfaction and pledged to return to purely talent-based hiring and employment practices. While Disney is not rescinding all their focus on gender, sexuality, or race, the company is removing much of its focus from these points and back to making movies. In response to the first compromatio point, it can be argued that individualism is not inherently bad. Instead, it is an innately human trait which should be explored in film. In reply, the fault does not lie with individualism itself, instead, with its overemphasis. In an example of individualism used correctly, Elsa in Frozen displays selfishness and excessive individualism when she freezes Arendelle and leaves behind to build her ice castle. Yet, this selfishness is directly rebuked by Anna, who is injured in an overflow of her sister's emotions. Anna, while turning to ice, still protects her sister. Elsa's grief at her loss soon falls away when Anna is brought back to life through her self-sacrificial act of true sisterly love. Elsa then learns that love can thaw a frozen heart and unfreezes Arendelle. She retains some of the individual discovery born through her character arc, but she combats her own selfishness. Frozen therefore stands in juxtaposition to the unchecked selfishness of other modern era films, showing that overemphasis and not individualism itself is the problem. In response to the second compromatio point, it can be contended that methods like a split plot are an acceptable example of artistic expression and exploration. In reply, a split plot, like that of Strange World, is a deviation from the classical plot structure, which creates a markedly worse film. In one respect, a split plot is less effective than a traditional plot because it does not parallel the realities of life. An illustration of this is The Sound of Music's plot, based upon the true story of the Von Trapp family. The climax of the film occurs when the family sings their final performance in defiance of the Nazis, paralleling the actual events of Maria's life. While excellent plots do not need to follow a factual story, and often do not, The Sound of Music exemplifies the necessity of a single climax plot because it parallels the actual life experience of Maria. A single climax Freytag plot also allows stories to direct the audience's emotion and attention to one cohesive narrative, driving towards a climax, creating more effective and memorable narratives. In response to the third compromatio point, it can be argued that Disney, by implementing practices of DEI in its movie production, enlarged the cultural perspectives of its films, connecting with a broader audience. This thesis contends that Disney could still ensure connection with a broader audience and various cultural perspectives without spending such substantial sums of money on DEI. In fact, Lion King did just that, with many members of the production team traveling to Africa. They interviewed Native Africans in order to gain firsthand experience of their culture and values so as to include or allude to them throughout the film. In contrast, Raya and the Last Dragon also brought on a team of consultants to convey different perspectives. However, in the end, Disney focused on fostering and marketing DEI practices in the production team instead of highlighting their efforts to achieve cultural authenticity within the actual film. Therefore, certain film critics and audience members saw the film as too broad in its approach to Southeast Asian cultures. Even when attempting to appease cultural trends, Disney failed. Their focus on the diverse nature of the production team left the movie itself lacking in its main selling point, Southeast Asian cultural representation. Placing focus on the movie itself and the timeless values has ensured that the older Disney films outlined throughout this thesis continue to be well loved, even in a more modern era, instead of being beholden to promoting a specific fad from the past. In conclusion, Disney's modern disconnect from virtue in transcendent narratives has eroded the timelessness of their storytelling. This was through, first, the rise of excessive individualism, which led to single-trait, flat characters. Second, the discarding of transcendent values and narratives undermined its plots. And third, Disney lost its anchor by shifting focus from creating content to emulating prevailing social trends. When I was 10 years old, I went to my library and checked out an audiobook of Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales and one of Grimm's fairy tales. As I listened to their descriptions of magical lands and laughed and cried along with the protagonists, it reinforced my imagination. These stories also reinforced ideas of truth, beauty, and goodness, as the protagonists invariably embodied some combination of compassion, kindness, loyalty, and courage. These same feelings were evoked by the Disney films I watched, like Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, and Beauty and the Beast. These transcendent narratives hold value because they point back to virtues which God possesses. Colossians 2:8 says, "See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the elemental spiritual forces of this world, rather than on Christ." Christians have the responsibility to promote and imbibe transcendent narratives and impart these narratives to our children through transcendent media. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Urton. Would you
I'm so sorry.
would you still say that Disneyland is the happiest place on earth?
Unfortunately, I've actually never been to Disneyland, so I cannot speak to how it's changed over the years, but I would love to visit one day.
All right. Well, there was a book, it was published a number of years ago, written by a Syrian author, in which he described the efforts of a family whose father had passed away in one part of the country to transport like his body back to the family plot some hundreds of miles away. And it was a very, lengthy journey because they encountered various checkpoints and military forces, and by the time they arrived at the gravesite, their father's body was beginning to decay, and there were maggots, but they buried him, and then they went back to where they had started, and then the story ended, and then I was left wondering what was the point. It was an interesting story. Would you care to draw like any analogies with the emptiness of that narrative with your arguments about a corresponding emptiness in the Disney narratives, like as you're describing them?
I'm sorry, could you repeat your question?
Would you care to draw an analogy between the seeming modernity-driven emptiness of the story I described to you with the emptiness that you're detecting in the Disney narratives?
Yes, absolutely. So I don't know this story, but it sounds like you have a lot of really difficult things that happen throughout the story. And it actually sounds like, from what you described, that they followed the Freytag methods of storytelling. But if you do not end your story with those timeless virtues and reinforcing those timeless virtues, then it's not going to have that same weight. So that's one of my points in my thesis, is that throughout your characters and your plot, you need to be pointing back, even if it's a sad story, you need to be pointing back to those timeless values which God possesses, which then gives meaning to your story, because we gather all of our meaning from the Creator.
What do you think is the role of art in society?
That is a large question.
Yes, it is.
Yes, so I believe that art is a way that humans can express our creativity, reflecting as image bearers of God, our God-given desire to create. And in art specifically, with the thesis that I wrote, we have these stories that help us to reflect the world that is around us. but also help us to teach our children and remind ourselves of values that are so important. And so that art has value in, again, pointing back to the Creator who gives the meaning to this world. And we are able to see the virtues which God possesses. We're able to bring those into our own creativity through these stories and through art in general to then allow art to have meaning and to have that role. Storytelling has a large role in society because all of our lives we can see them as stories. And so we all live in a story. We all live in the grand story of history. And so because of that, we want to understand our own stories, and so then we are able to story tell outside of that, again, reflecting God.
Is it the role of art to, so what you're saying is that, good art should reflect, certain values.
Yes.
So, suppose art does not reflect these transcendent values. Is it still good, like and useful art? Because it is the product of a like an image bearer's imagination. And is there something we should try to learn from that?
Yes, I believe so. That it's a bit of a broad question. Are you willing to give me an example of art that does not point towards timeless values, but that we could still gain wisdom from?
Well, I'll just give an example with which some of us may be familiar as Marcel Duchamp's creation of like a golden toilet. So does that provide us with any like enlightening insights into the nature of ourselves or reality, or perish the thought, I'm God?
Yes, so art in that form would be, we would look at it and we would all have different interpretations of what that art means. I don't know why he created that statue. It's a funny thing to think about. But yes, because it is created by an image bearer of God, every human who looks at it can say, okay, I may not have the same interpretation of this art piece, I probably don't, of why there's a golden toilet in this museum, but I can look at it and I can say, yes, I can think about perhaps why we throw our wealth away on silly things, or why we need to understand or get inside the minds of other humans so that I can understand why the Creator created this. And that does give us the opportunity to understand, okay, why do we need to know about God? Why can't we just say God is the Creator? We need to understand the Creator. And so then that art would allow me to then think about, why is this Creator creating what He is? And then it's reminding me that I should be wondering, why did God create the way He created? Why did God allow us to be creative, even in art that I maybe don't see a lot of purpose in, or even with stories that do not have transcendent values, you still understand that it's created by creative people. You can appreciate that even if it does not hold the timelessness of the transcendent values.
Okay, one last question. If I did not believe in God and I were to view that golden toilet, is it safe to say I would probably view it a little differently than a person who does believe in God and the scriptures?
Certainly, yes.
Yeah. So could we say that Disney's later and narratives were simply the work of people who were dismissing the idea of God, and while that's, lamentable, like, is that really spoiling our childhood memories, like of Disney, or is it just the way the world is right now?
Would you be willing to rephrase the question? I think I understand what you're getting at, but would you mind rephrasing it?
Well, so could we say that the Disney, rather the later Disney narratives, even though they don't appear to be promoting any transcendent value, but rather a perspective devoid of such value, can we still resolve to learn from those without obscuring our many happy memories, like of earlier Disney movies?
Yes, I believe that we can learn from the modern era films, and for twofold reasons. First, because I learned a lot by looking through this and doing this thesis about why are narratives so important, and why is how we write a narrative so important, and why are transcendent values so important. And these narratives, these modern era Disney films that did not have the excellent plot or did not have those transcendent values still pointed me back to learning more about the narrative and the transcendent values. And then the other reason is that these are still created by humans, so we have that image of God in them. So even if they are not having good characters that have those timeless values or those plots, they still have elements that are good. So you still have reconciliation. It may not be backed by the characters actually having the timeless values, but you may have an element of reconciliation in the plot. It doesn't build to the reconciliation, it doesn't have anything surrounding it, but you still have reconciliation in the actual story without any of the narrative lead up.
So I'm much older than you, and I have had the pleasure to visit Disneyland in Anaheim and Disney World in Florida. And those are great experiences, and you must go at some point. With regard to your thesis of the degradation of the Disney films, so I assume that you've observed, you did watch all those earlier films
Yes.
as well? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking now in terms of my grandchildren who are watching some of the Disney films. What is your view on whether or not, for example, the more recent modern Disney films, have they degraded to a point where you would actually censor them for your grandchildren, or not your grandchildren,
Yeah.
mine?
Yes. I would say for sure Strange World, I would.
Okay.
I watched the film and it was not only deeply unenjoyable, but also had such selfishness and other very anti-Christian even ideas in the film. So yes, I would for sure censor that. And then there are other portions of later Disney films where they're promoting a selfishness that I don't think is good for young children to be imbibing. However, if you are older and you say, okay, all my friends have seen this film, I wouldn't necessarily say you cannot watch this movie, but you have to watch it with discernment.
Would you encourage parents to preview films before they allow their children to view them? And if upon preview, if the child is old enough to appreciate so I worked for a guy named Frankie Schaefer, Francis Schaefer's son, and he had the contention that all of art needs no justification. In other words, all of art is okay. However, if you are trying to teach your children the truths of Scripture and virtues and so on and so forth, is it okay to allow them at a certain age then to view things as long as you discuss with them, you know, what the bad things are that are being promoted?
Yes, so I think censoring and previewing for your children, absolutely. Yes, you should, especially if they are young. And you cannot just trust, they put the Disney label on it, yes, my child can watch it. You do need to preview it, you do need to watch it, and you need to make sure that this aligns with a biblical worldview. When they get older, I fully agree that yes, you can allow your children to watch more difficult things. As you get older, they will be able to understand more of those difficult things. But you also do need to discuss with them, okay, this is not part of the biblical worldview. This is not good. It may be presented as good in the film, and at a certain point, if they are presenting evil, just straight up evil as good, you should not let your child watch it. But if there's something that's evil that's allowed by culture or allowed in the world, and they're presenting it as good, then you can discuss with your child, okay, this is evil, but you can understand why it's in the film, you can understand it's part of the culture that you live in, and then now you can also understand how to better engage with it.
Very good. Thank you for your answers.
Well, so you talked about transcendent values.
Yes.
And those values really are ones that Aristotle talks about as really human universals. And so I know that you're making the connection that those characteristics, those qualities are in fact linked to God, and that's why we're drawn to them, right? Would you also say that there is a similar connection to a story arc that pleases us, and can you talk about that?
Yes, absolutely. So as I was thinking about Freytag's pyramid and why does this work so well, God is the master storyteller. He wrote all of history. He is the one who lays it out. And Freytag's pyramid works and takes those biblical narratives and is able to say, okay, here's the grand story of history, and here's how we boil it down into these couple points to make it digestible and easy for a writer. So as I'm thinking about the story of the Bible, we have exposition starting in Genesis 1 and 2 with creation. We set up our main characters. That's God and humans. Those are the people who, and of course the creator of the universe, who the entire Bible revolves around. And then we have the rising action, which is quite lengthy in the Bible. We start with the fall, which is our problem. We have sin in the world. Now we have our rising action throughout the whole Old Testament, through the birth of Jesus all the way to the cross. So we have all of this. We have prophecies about Jesus, and then we have Jesus actually coming. And then after that, we have the climax, which is the resurrection, the ultimate defeat of death, which was the punishment for sin in our crisis. And now we have that fixed. That problem is now fixed in our climax. Then we have the falling action after Jesus' resurrection into his ascension, and then we have all of the rest of the Bible up until Revelation, so we have missionary work, and we also have ourselves inside of that great story currently. And then we resolve with Revelation, which is when Christ comes back and all of the people worship him, and that's how we end the story with just ultimate joy.
Okay, so you're saying because it follows, so are you saying that we long for that kind of story arc?
Yes.
And we long for it because that's the story arc that God follows?
Yes.
Or God has put forth,
yes,
I guess?
Yeah.
Okay. So would you say that our desires are based on what the Lord has put in us, or are they based on what we see time and time again and so because it is common for us to see that we're drawn to it?
I think that there are elements of both. So for the most part, I would say it is probably a reflection of we see these stories over and over again. Like I said before, the humans have a story of our lives, and we also see smaller stories throughout time. And the stories that we remember follow this Freytag's pyramid. And maybe they don't explicitly tell you that they follow Freytag's pyramid, but we can find the climax, we can find the resolution, we can find the exposition. So we see it in our everyday lives, and if you're a Christian, in the Bible. But then also I think that there is an element of we are created in God's image, and God did put certain desires in our hearts. And I do not know to what extent those desires go, because I am not God, but I know that those desires are put within us to reflect God as his image bearers. And if he set in this way of telling stories and this way that narratives work, then we would also want to reflect that, if subconsciously and not acknowledged.
Okay. So then help me understand, Encanto won an Academy Award for a Best Animated Feature. The soundtrack was very popular. Help me understand, I guess, the influence, if there's something innate in us that God has planted for us to long toward the virtue, long toward an orderly story arc, then what is going on in society that draws us to things that are counter to what you just said?
Right, so I think this is a very telling thing. I would say that a lot of the films now that are being awarded Academy Awards and other such nominations are not following those timeless virtues. They may be following the correct plot structure, like Encanto does, but they are not promoting those timeless values. And I think that we do have this shift in our culture that I talk about in my paper with this urge for individualism. And like I also say in my paper, individualism is not bad. It's not inherently a bad thing, but we have come to a place where we are overemphasizing individualism. And I talk about that in the historical context of starting off with, as we learned in Omnibus, the Reformation, where we are having this need to explore God for ourselves. We cannot have the church telling us, this is what you must believe. We actually want to read the Bible for ourselves. We want to have a personal relationship with God, and that is great. That is individualism used correctly. And then that moves from we're using individualism correctly to the individual is most important. And then we see that reflected in our films. And that's why it's culturally acceptable and even culturally lauded to say the individual is most important. But that is not what the timeless values say. And even if that's what culture thinks now, that's a transient cultural tide. That's not how humans have thought for all of humanity. So we don't want to tie ourselves down to cultural tides that can change later on in films that we want to be transcendent.
So I just want to drill down into your thesis a little bit more. Let me restate what I got, and you tell me if I'm right or not. But essentially, it's that Disney films are getting worse because they are unmoored from transcendent values. Is that?
Yes, and then they're also holding on to cultural tides, yes.
Okay. By what metrics, and again, I'm kind of asking you to restate things from your thesis, but maybe in different terms to bring something out. So by what metric do you demonstrate that they're getting worse?
Right, so as I go through, in my actual thesis, I didn't include them in the speech for time purposes. I have audience scores, so you can see the audience scores deteriorating. Also, you can see as they move away from what I'm arguing is the most important narrative structure, that also represents deterioration in the largest part. So you're seeing a deviation from narrative that has held on for centuries and centuries, millennia with Aristotle and going back, and we're now deviating from that, and that shows a deterioration in quality as well.
Okay, does it complicate your thesis that Encanto was a huge financial success?
Not necessarily. I think that it actually ties in with the individualism of the culture, that there's also really excellent, the music in Encanto is quite good, and so that was enjoyable as well, and it went pretty viral. So you have that as well. But as you were talking about these movies that can be really popular now, or even Encanto was not as popular audience score-wise as other previous Disney films, you would have this, this deviation that is not going to be timeless. So my argument is not that it is super popular now and therefore it's good. I'm saying that it's timeless narrative that is going to hold on for a long time.
Okay. So in terms of how you could demonstrate the first point of your confirmatio, you're kind of wagering on a future in which Encanto does not have the staying power of The Lion King, or something like that? Or are you saying that there's something you're demonstrating now to show a downward slope?
Again, in the audience scores, we see that it is quite a bit lower than previous Disney films. So you have it in the 90s, the high 90s for a lot of the most popular Disney films that I mentioned, and then we now have it in the mid 80s for Encanto, and then for Raya and the Last Dragon, then it drops off for Strange World. And so you do see that now, but again, it is holding on to a cultural tide that we're still in. So it's going to be popular based on those cultural whims. My argumentation for my first point is that that is not good. It is not good timeless virtues to be imparting to children and to ourselves to be overemphasizing individualism. It is not reflecting God. Instead, it is basing itself on that cultural love of overemphasis of individualism.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm just poking around to see if some of these exceptions can be explained by the thesis. But another exception would be with regards to the narrative arc. So huge financial success, as well as a huge cultural success, is My Neighbor Totoro that came out of Studio Ghibli. To this day, my girls will ask me to turn on the opening song and march around the living room to it. My Neighbor Totoro has a very unconventional plot arc. To say it has a plot is probably generous, but huge success, and it has this kind of like emotional force, but it has, the rising action, climax falling action is almost impossible to apply to the movie. But here it is, a very powerful movie in some respects, and in terms of like audience metrics, enormously successful and has some staying power. I think it was made in the early 80s late 80s, I can't remember. But in any case, what do you make of that? Here's an unconventional narrative, but international hit.
Right. I actually don't know the plot of My Neighbor Totoro.
Sure, yeah, and I'm not asking you to know the plot as much as just how do you account for stories that are gripping but stray from the either they have a split narrative like Lord of the Rings, or they don't fit the narrative arc.
I would argue I actually do know Lord of the Rings, so I'm going to sort of latch onto that a little bit more since I don't know Totoro. I would argue that Lord of the Rings actually does have one overarching single climax with the dropping of the ring into Mordor, the ultimate defeat of Sauron. So you have narratives where, again, I don't know Totoro, but if you look through it and you're able to find, at least even, it doesn't have to be exactly, let me pinpoint, right here is where the rising action starts and stops. You can say, as long as it has the exposition so we know who the characters are, and then we have the climax, and then we have that resolution. Then you have a story that is going to be memorable and you're going to be able to follow logically. And then that reflects that greater narrative and that seems to be, from my understanding of the question, how the plot is going for Totoro, but I'm not sure.
Thanks, good job.
Thank you so much.
All right, we're going to get started on our next thesis. So here we're beginning some of the junior theses, beginning with Mr. Takeo.
A religion shrouded in mystery and appeal. A-list celebrities, the likes of Tom Cruise and John Travolta, tout the benefits. These benefits are shocking. Some claim powers of perfect health, perfect recall, and even telekinesis. A religion that claims to clear you of mental health problems, an increasingly prevalent problem in modern times, yet is based purely on scientific principles discovered by a revolutionary mind in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. A religion for the modern human, based purely on science and not bogged down by thousands of years of traditions and hierarchy. This sounds like a fantasy, but this is precisely what a religion offers. When I first started thinking of religions to write my junior thesis on, there were many that piqued my interest: Mormonism, Judaism, Buddhism, and Islam. But one piqued my interest most of all. I had seen my friend present on it the year before and was fascinated. From a profound way of thinking of existence to a therapy based in science, this had all the hallmarks of a religion that would be interesting to research and examine. And as such, I chose Scientology. My research sought to answer whether, 1, Scientology can serve as a valid belief system and coherent religion, and 2, can Scientology stand up to the test of logical examination and evaluation? To understand Scientology fully, one must understand its enigmatic founder, L. Ron Hubbard. He was born in Tilden, Nebraska in 1911 to Harry Ross Hubbard and Ladora Mae Hubbard. In high school, he edited his school's newspaper, a sign of a prolific writing career to come. And during the Second World War, he would serve as a lieutenant under General Douglas MacArthur. In 1946, L. Ron Hubbard began his study of Dianetics, and at the urging of some friends, published Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health, in 1950. The book was a massive success, and its success was such that the first Hubbard Dianetic Research Foundation was founded in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and additional centers would soon pop up in Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles. This was just the beginning of his countless works and writings on Scientology. This was the point that he ceased to be known as a pulp fiction author and instead was known as the head of an international religious movement. The foremost question to answer about any religion is, what is it? Scientology is perplexing in that it can be condensed into one sentence, yet expounded upon for a lifetime. Scientology is, as L. Ron Hubbard said, quote, the studying and handling of the spirit in relationship to itself, universes, and other life, end quote. That is to say, Scientology is the study and application of knowledge gained through study of the spirit in relation to itself, the universe, and other life. The second question any religion must answer is what the goal of the religion is. In Scientology, the goal is, quote, making the individual capable of living a better life in his own estimation and with his fellows and the playing of a better game. That is to, end quote. That is to say, Scientology's goal is to give someone the tools they need to live a better life by their own estimation, thus not forcing an external value system upon them, and also allowing them to live a better life with their friends. Scientology's core belief flows naturally from its definition. The core belief of Scientology is that, quote, it is possible to know about the mind, the spirit, and life, end quote. Scientology's most fundamental concept is called the cycle of action. This is one of Scientology's most complex ideas, but it is at the core of Scientology. As L. Ron Hubbard explains, in very ancient books it is written, quote, in very ancient books it is written that from chaos came birth, from birth there was growth, when growth was achieved there was then a gradual decay, the decay then ended in death, and after death there was chaos, end quote. This cycle is an apparency, he said. He said, quote, "It is what we see, what we behold, and what we believe," end quote. One example of this is the cycle of action for life. A child is born, grows older, and eventually dies. Scientology shows how none of these things are necessary. It is just because one considers them so that they are true. This is not the real truth, however. It is merely apparent because we believe we see it. This example thoroughly explains the cycle of action as it appears to be, but this cycle is not true, which can be tested thus according to L. Ron Hubbard. Quote, "By using the cycle of action, can we make anyone well or more intelligent? Thousands of tests have proven that the use of and belief in the cycle of action have made none well or intelligent. However, there is a real cycle of action. This is create, 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 counter, create, no creation, and nothingness. These terms can be simplified as follows. Creating something, continually creating something one moment after the next, creating something against a creation, no creative activity, and then nothing. For example, for a wall to be apparent, it must be constantly created. And when someone destroys it, they are simply creating the activity of knocking down the wall. We vilify the creativity involved in knocking down the wall by using the word destructive. Thus, there is no such thing as destruction. Someone can only create against a creation. In Scientology, there are three conditions of existence: be, do, and have. L. Ron Hubbard sums these up well when he wrote, "The game of life demands that one assumes a beingness in order to accomplish a doingness in the direction of havingness." This summation of existence makes sense, as in order to have something, a human must do something to get it, and in order to do something, a human must be. There are 8 main divisions to which the conditions of existence can be applied. Each division also has its own cycle of action. These 8 dynamics are also known as the 8 urges in life. They are the self dynamic, the sex dynamic, the group dynamic, the mankind's dynamic, the animal dynamic, the universe dynamic, the spiritual dynamic, and the infinity dynamic. These 8 dynamics can be thought of as concentric circles, where a person stands in the middle. The next circle outside the person is the second dynamic, and so on. The 8th circle, infinity, is boundless. One of the next key beliefs in Scientology is that the individual man is divisible into 3 parts. First is the spirit, which Scientologists call the thetan. Second is the mind. Third is the body, which Scientology does not deal with. Even though it is more complicated, the thetan must be fully understood to understand the mind. The thetan is described by Scientology as having no mass, wavelength, energy, or time and location in space except by consideration. The thetan is not a thing, it is a creator of things. It is usually near the skull or the body, and it can be in one of 4 states. First, it can be entirely separated from a body, or even the universe. Second, it can be near a body and knowingly control the body. Third, it can be in the body, around the skull. And fourth, a thetan can be in the inverted condition, whereby it is compulsively away from the body and cannot approach it. The mind is a communication and control system between a thetan and its environment. It has 3 parts: the analytical mind, the reactive mind, and the somatic mind. The analytical mind combines the past and estimations of the future to make conclusions. The reactive mind is a stimulus response mechanism that never stops working. The subject of Dianetics, a sub-branch of Scientology that will soon be talked about, is concerned almost entirely with destroying the reactive mind. The somatic mind acts out the actions that the other minds tell it to, and thus the other minds are higher than it. In Scientology, a person's progress is defined by their position on the bridge to total freedom, where they start as a pre-clear, or someone who has not yet destroyed the reactive mind, but is trying to do so through auditing, which will be discussed in a moment, and go through grades 1 through 4. They are then considered clear, That is, they have destroyed the reactive mind and start going up the OT, or operating thetan levels, which are numbered 1 through 8. All religions, however, have practices that must be carried out to be considered a member of the religion. Just as Muslims and Christians engage in reading their scriptures and other such spiritual disciplines, Scientologists use auditing to rid a person of memories or experiences holding them back. An auditor, which means one who listens, is someone trained in the exact science of Dianetics. An auditing session is when an auditor talks with a pre-clear and, using carefully worded questions, has the person release the engrams holding them back. These engrams are past traumatic experiences perfectly stored. That is, a person can go back and perfectly relive that memory. An auditor uses the readings from an e-meter, which, to use, a pre-clear holds 2 metal cans connected to the e-meter, and when the needle on the e-meter moves up, the pre-clear has begun to access deeply buried traumatic memories, which the auditor uses the e-meter to flesh out and help the pre-clear destroy them. These beliefs and practices of Scientology provide a good summary of their beliefs, but can these beliefs reasonably hold together? My examination of these claims will find that Scientology cannot be considered a valid religion because its core claims are unfalsifiable, unsupported by empirical evidence, and inconsistent with established scientific understanding. These 3 problems are enough to disprove Scientology, as they show how Scientology cannot stand up to a simple, logical analysis of their claims. First, the truth claims of Scientology are not independently testable or verifiable. The first example of this is their creation story for thetans. In it, Hubbard says that there was originally an energy separate from the universe called theta, and that this being was somehow blown up and individual thetans, or souls, were formed by this explosion, and that the thetans formed their own universes which they can share. Mest, which means matter, energy, space, and time, is formed by multiple things agreeing to participate in this universe. And over time, the thetans became trapped in this reality and forgot their original nature. Hubbard and Scientology as a whole offer no evidence to support this claim, and it cannot be independently verified, as no one that could possibly be alive today witnessed this, and nobody from that time period recorded what happened. The second problem with Scientology is that all improvements are credited to Scientology, while failure is attributed to not practicing enough Scientology, thus making them unfalsifiable. One example of this is auditing. In auditing, any success whatsoever is attributed to a successful auditing session, but any failure is attributed to the subject. This was found in an official government report conducted in Victoria, Australia in 1965, from which it can be summarized that, first, sessions are always done in the strictest routine. The pre-clear is asked if it is all right to audit where they are and if the session can begin. The auditor then says, "Start of session," and it is begun. Second, the questions are repeated almost identically till the meter does not read. Third, goals are stated and recorded at the beginning of the session, and the pre-clear tells what improvements were made after the session. Sometimes the pre-clear is not sure about gains, but when reminded of the goals, readily agrees that gains were made. Fourth, these questions about gains are stated in such a way as to induce a favorable answer. Fifth, the auditor thanks the pre-clear for whatever gains are said to have been made, expresses regret that the auditor has failed in some areas, which in turn makes the pre-clear feel guilty. In the last point of the report, it is saying that there's emotional manipulation going on between the auditor and the pre-clear. The auditor is expressing thanks to the pre-clear for success, who in turn considers that this success was only possible because of auditing and the work it did. And then the auditor apologizes for any gains not made, thus casting the blame onto the auditor and away from Scientology's practices, which in turn casts the blame onto the pre-clear, as he would naturally assume that some of the blame is his fault and the auditor is trying to make him feel better. Lastly, their claims conflict with well-established theories without providing stronger evidence. The first example of this is claims about engrams conflicting with trauma theory. Modern trauma theory posits that people who experience a traumatic event are likely to subconsciously disrupt memory making so that they don't remember the traumatic event. L. Ron Hubbard posits that engrams perfectly store traumatic experiences and the emotions of them, and that they can only be erased through auditing. Modern science has many ways to deal with trauma, from exposure therapy to cognitive processing therapy. However, there is not any empirical data to support that auditing helps with reducing this trauma. I first argued that the truth claims of Scientology are not independently testable or verifiable. A Scientologist might respond to this by inviting someone to come and test for themselves whether Scientology works, and that someone, as an independent, impartial observer, could come and see for themselves that it actually works. However, this claim only truly points out how far from being a modern science Scientology is. Because Scientology is based on anecdotal evidence, they would invite a critical observer to come and try it out for themselves. However, this is flawed. Anecdotal evidence does not meet the standards outlined in the scientific method because one isolated incident cannot establish truth. There have been no invitations extended by the Church of Scientology to serious researchers to test whether following their religion results in a better emotional or mental state. And the only government report that examined Scientology stated that, quote, Scientology has insidiously infiltrated the medical community. In reality, it is a dangerous medical cult, end quote. And that, quote, Scientologists almost invariably apply sledgehammer methods, hitting savagely wherever they see a head. Such methods are often disastrous, end quote. The report also found that even though there are claims of a, quote, filter system, wherein the ill and insane are not encouraged to seek Scientology as a cure, the filter system does not filter, for these are Scientology's prime targets, end quote. Second, I argued that all improvements are credited to Scientology, while failure is attributed to not practicing enough Scientology, thus making it unfalsifiable. To this, a thoughtful Scientologist might point out that other religions do the exact same thing. For example, in Christianity, success or happiness is always attributed to God, but failure or tragedy is met with dismissal or the cliche, I'll pray for you. This view would fail to understand logical correlation. Just because one religion does a similar thing to what Scientology does not make that thing true. To use an example from modern literature, just because Lord Voldemort believes he can beat Harry Potter in a duel in the book Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, his followers believing the same thing simply does not make it true. Third, I argued that their claims conflict with well-established theories without providing stronger evidence. To this, a thoughtful Scientologist would point out how scientific theories have changed before, so conflicting with current theories doesn't necessarily falsify what they are saying. However, this is a poor understanding of science. Scientific theories are only usurped when a new theory, often based on an old one, makes more sense of the evidence and is better at explaining what will happen. For example, Einstein built upon Newton's work to come up with relativity, which helped replace humans' Newtonian understanding of the universe with a more complete picture that was better at predicting what would happen. Scientology cannot serve as a reasonable or valid religion. This speech has shown this, but also that we must not entertain these false religions at all. These religions are not helpful to a society, but can rather be detrimental. This can be seen in Scientology purporting to heal mental diseases when some people need the help of a real medical professional. False religions do not deserve humanity's allegiance, but should instead serve as a warning for what happens when humanity fails to apply God-given skills of logical analysis to analyze a religion. When humanity fails to utilize these God-given skills, they are neglecting the very tools God gave them to distinguish between truth and deception. Scientology, full of mystery and allure for some, cannot serve as a reasonable and coherent religion. Despite promising healing and hope, it only gives hurt and harm. Scientology is a religion that requires its followers to abandon the reason and logic that God permeated into every fiber of creation. Unlike Scientology, truth does not hide from the light. Because it simply cannot stand up to a critical logical analysis, Scientology must do exactly that. And ultimately, that which cannot endure scrutiny of God-given reason does not deserve humanity's allegiance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Takeo. Even the most militantly atheist people I know aren't afraid of Scientology. But most sociologists would say that like a religion consists of three basic components: a set of beliefs, a set of rituals or practices, and a community. But you're arguing that Scientology cannot be a religion, but it surely, reflects these three like attributes. And even if it isn't coherent, at least from your standpoint, what is the harm in allowing people, to pursue what they find to be very fulfilling? They have a community, they have beliefs that seem to help them, they have practices that they find enriching. What's the problem?
Well, first I would like to say I'm not arguing that it's not a religion. I'm just arguing that it's not a logically coherent religion. So I do believe it's a religion. I believe there are lots of religions that are not logically coherent, but I still believe it's a religion. As to how we would, or why we would allow them to, pursue this if they think it's fulfilling, I would say that one of the main problems with that is that in reality it's really not that fulfilling. And if you look up anything about Scientology, you'll just see case after case of people being caused harm or having really deep trauma from their time in Scientology. And there's lots of examples of people who, for example, they were in Scientology and then they might have disagreed with the church a little and then they just disappeared and nobody knows where they went. So I would say it's actually quite dangerous to allow people to do stuff just because they find something fulfilling or they think it's fulfilling to them doesn't make it true.
Okay. Now you mentioned that that Scientology is not falsifiable, and by this do you mean that it can't be tested? In Christianity, we might say that some people experience a conversion, they become totally different people. They think differently, they behave differently, and yet, unless we can look into their bodies, their brains, their spirits, we don't know exactly what happened or why it happened, but we believe that it happened by faith. So is this anecdotal evidence of a change? Can this be tested?
So I would say that anecdotal evidence could maybe add a little bit to a claim or support a little bit of a claim, but I would say that it can't solely hold up a claim by itself. So for example, in the case of Christianity, there have been a ton of examples that, people who, go to church or read their Bible, 3-4 times a week, they're a lot happier by far than, just the average human. So I would say there is that empirical data that supports Christianity, but I would say that, so anecdotal evidence can support, but in itself, it cannot make or compose of an argument.
Okay. But what about the people like whose lives have been shaped in a positive way by Scientology. They feel fulfilled, they feel stronger. Is that, can that be regarded as something that's testable, falsifiable, if we consider the person who converts to Christianity as being, this is like anecdotal evidence that a change has occurred? What would you say?
So, you're saying, what would I say to the claim that like a Scientologist finds fulfillment and purpose in Scientology?
Well, I'm saying that for that like a person who finds fulfillment and enrichment in Scientology, that's anecdotal evidence, whereas a person who finds enrichment and fulfillment in Christianity, is that like anecdotal evidence, or can that be tested? And then by what measure can it be tested?
Yeah, so I think that for both religions, obviously, it's mainly anecdotal evidence in those two cases. But I would say that in Christianity, as opposed to Scientology, there's a lot more empirical evidence to kind of almost support the idea that finding fulfillment or happiness by following that is actually possible, if that makes sense.
Would you say that in the case of both Christianity and Scientology that people tend to believe on the basis of what they already believed to be true?
Yeah, for sure. I would say that, I mean, obviously a lot of what we believe is shaped by our worldview, how we were raised, you know, who our parents were, all of this stuff. So I would say, yeah, it's a pretty big factor.
Okay. So I'm just thinking about the role of, confirmation,
Yeah.
bias in all of this, and how difficult that is to factor in or to test. And but I can see that if we put both perspectives together, would you say that what saves Christianity, to put it this way, is the amount of like historical evidence that's, for instance, embedded in the scriptures?
So you're asking what?
Well, would the historical evidence of Christianity as it's presented in the Bible, would you consider this to be more like empirically solid than the feelings, rather, the conclusions of Scientology, and why?
I would say yes, because in a lot of the cases for what the Bible is claiming, there's a ton of sources outside of the Bible that would support what it's saying. Ooh, sorry. So, for example, in I think it's in Nahum, they talk about, the sacking of Nineveh and how it's going to get destroyed and all of that. But there's actually like real life historical artifacts that we can date to that time period that'll say, this actually happened, like he wasn't just making it up or whatever. So yeah, I would say in general there's a lot more outside evidence to support what the Bible is claiming, as opposed to Scientology, which doesn't really have a lot of outside evidence.
Okay, thank you.
So, prior to L. Ron Hubbard, was there any other form of religion or group or organization that was similar to Scientology? I mean, did he base any of his ideas or theories on anything prior to himself?
So I would say that I'm not familiar with all the world religions. I mean, there's
Okay.
been millions probably, so
Okay.
he might have
So
gotten
he's the
some
first.
stuff from there.
He's the first. Kind of like
Yeah, his
Joseph
ideas
Smith
are-
started Mormonism,
Yeah.
and Mary Baker Eddy.
He wasn't
started,
like really
yeah,
basing
okay.
it primarily on
Okay.
anything
Who's
specific.
the current head of Scientology?
David, I don't know how to say his last name. It's like Miscavige,
Miscavige, yes.
Miscavige.
Right. And it's a very wealthy, they have a lot of
Yes.
money,
Yes.
don't they? And a lot of the proponents are of them, like your Tom Cruise and so forth, have a lot of money and support it in that regard. Do you know how many people subscribe to Scientology?
Yes.
Generally?
So, if you believe what the church claims, which generally for a lot of stuff you really shouldn't be doing, but they claim that I think it's around 25 million members worldwide.
25 million.
But if you look at like studies on religion and stuff that pick random people and they're like, "What religion are you?" and then they, exponentiate. I might have
Extrapolate, yeah.
extrapolate. There's the word. And then they extrapolate that out to the whole country. They say maybe 100 to 200,000 Scientologists. So it's a vastly different figure than what the church is claiming.
Okay. Did you read any of L. Ron Hubbard's fictional books?
I didn't read
all?
any of his fictional books. I know they're mostly concerned with space and like
Space.
cosmic warfare, which
Right.
actually is kind of what their creation story is based in for Earth, which is really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can really see his background as a writer.
Well, I mean, your information has convinced me that I'm not going to pursue Scientology.
Happy to hear that an elder of our church is not going to be a Scientologist anytime too soon. Mr. Takeo, I've got some terminology questions for you. One is, and I think this is what Dr. Marsh was getting to, you use the term legitimate religion. So is there a difference between a true religion and a legitimate religion? And if so, help me understand the differences between the terminology.
I would say that the way I was using legitimate, I believe this is from my paper, was that it's just a religion that is true, it's correct. In general, it portrays stuff as how it is. So I would say like Christianity, for example, is a legitimate or true religion according to what I believe. So, but I would say Scientology is not legitimate, so it's not true, it's not accurate depiction.
Wait, you said you qualified it. You say, well, I believe it. So is there some...
Well, because there might be some people out there that don't believe that Christianity is a legitimate religion.
Does it make it not legitimate?
If you ask me, no. If you ask someone else, then maybe. It depends on who you ask.
Okay, how do you determine who's right?
Who has the best evidence to support their claims?
Okay, so I'm sorry to press you here, but so a true religion, Dr. Marsh was talking about the 3 qualifications of a religion.
Yeah.
Okay, do you agree with his definition?
Yeah.
Okay, so is Scientology a religion?
Yes.
Okay. Are you saying that a true religion and a legitimate religion, are those the same thing? Are you using them synonymously and interchangeably?
Yeah, so I'm using them synonymously, but so I'm saying that Scientology is a religion, but it's not a legitimate, like as in a true religion. So it is a religion, but it is not true in nature.
Okay. All right, switching focus, you talked about unfalsifiable. Are the terms unverifiable and unfalsifiable the same thing?
I would love to think about that more. Did I use the term unverifiable in my paper? Or did I don't remember that.
You did speak about it up at the
I did.
podium today, and you used unfalsifiable throughout your paper.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, are those, in your mind, are those the same thing? And if not, what are the differences, and does it matter when we're thinking about it in terms of religions?
Well, so I would say they're very similar. They're very closely related. So, like, for example, when I think of unfalsifiability, I think of like the creation story from Scientology, that there's no way it can be proved false at all because no one was alive 75 million years ago and wrote it down and, you know, gave it to us today. When I think of unverifiability, I think of a very similar thing. So I would say it's almost the same, because with unverifiability, there's just not a whole lot of evidence to support the claim, I would say. So I would say unverifiability is the lack of evidence to support a claim, and then unfalsifiability is just a claim, like, in of itself cannot be proved true, if that makes sense.
Okay, and as your formal logic teacher, this is a bonus question, and I'd be so excited if you knew it. What logical fallacy is committed through that the unfalsibility of something?
If you say it, I'm gonna feel so stupid. Oh, I know it. I can't remember the term.
So is it ad ignorantium?
Oh yeah, I thought you were about to say ad hominem.
Right, so
I was
you're
like, I don't think
arguing
so.
you're arguing from a position of that you can't prove it not to be true, so it must be true. So is that what you're saying Scientology does?
Yeah, I'm saying that there's, for that specific claim, there's no way to prove it false. So I don't know if they would say that, but that's what I said in my paper. So yeah.
So it must be true because you said in your paper.
Well,
sorry, I'm giving you a hard time. All right, my last question. You quickly dismiss, both in your paper and you did it here, quickly dismiss the idea that, well, just because Christianity also might not measure up given a particular the measuring stick we're using, and Scientology falls flat, even though that same measuring stick placed at Christianity, hey, it might also not measure up. It doesn't matter.
So I would say that it really does matter. So I would say, and I believe you're talking about the example where I talked about, you might ask somebody, or you might say you failed at something, and they'll be like, "Oh, I'll pray for you." Is that what you were talking about? That example, or with
Right. Well, you do it in a couple of ways. In your measurement of Scientology not holding up, but I would argue that, for example, in your paper, which you did not talk about here, the institutional abuse you mentioned in your paper. Well, there is institutional abuse in Christian churches too. Should we dismiss Christianity because of institutional abuse?
So I would say not, because in the case of Christianity, that's not what we're called to do. It's a fallacious form of our religion. It's an inaccurate representation of what Jesus would want us to do. Whereas in Scientology, for example, like, there are examples where L. Ron Hubbard himself would, like abuse people and do this kind of thing. So I would say in Scientology, a lot of those examples of abuse are actually like a core part of the religion almost. Whereas in Christianity, yes, they happen, but that's not it. It's a very sad thing that they happen, and we should not be aiming to do them, because that's not what we're called to do, to act like Jesus.
Okay, so it's a perversion of our religion,
Exactly.
and yet it's like a core tenet of their religion?
Yeah.
Is that what you're arguing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Would Scientologists distinguish between mind and brain? Like, how would they interact with that distinction?
So I think they would, for the mind and the brain, I think they would probably say it's the same thing. I would guess, yeah, I would probably have to do a little more research just to be 100% certain, but I would guess they would think it's the same thing, based on what I know.
That the bodily organ of the brain and the mind with its three parts
Yeah.
are the same thing?
Yeah.
Huh. Okay. So there's been, growing research on the relationship of trauma to the body, even trauma that wasn't of a physical nature, but the body sort of storing the evidences of even an emotional trauma. So I know there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score, for instance, which is talking about this kind of thing. How do you expect a Scientologist? You'd mentioned that the Scientologists have little to say about the role of the body. You mentioned that at one point. And how would they interact with the mind-body relationship?
So I don't think they don't really interact with it. Like L. Ron Hubbard himself says that the body it's not really the concern of Scientology. They should, maybe go read a book on the body if they really want to find out. I would say with Scientology, it's more of a relationship between the soul and the mind, kind of, and how that relates to each other. So I would say there's not really, they don't care about the relationship unless it's like some extracurricular thing outside of Scientology. If that makes sense.
And then just a final question. How has your own thinking developed on the nature of mind and maybe the nature of the mind-body relationship? Any of those things, just how have you found your own thinking developing when it comes to mind?
I'd love to think about this for a really long time. I would say that one of the biggest changes I've seen on a more personal level is just that I would say I have a better understanding of how my mind relates to my soul and that kind of a thing. Like, how my mind interacts with my body. Like how when I think something, I have to think that thing and I have to decide upon that, but then a different part of my mind has to decide, okay, now if I think I want to move this if I think I want to move this microphone, and then, a different part of my brain has to be like, all right, move this microphone hand. And so I would say I've just understood really how interconnected the mind is, and especially with the soul too. So just the interconnectedness of everything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So at this point, we're going to break for lunch. So we will reconvene at 12:25 would be when we're hoping to start the next thesis.